She had a rule about men like Calder Rhys: don't look directly at them, not because they were blinding, but because you'd spend too long trying to figure out what you were looking at. And she didn't have the time. Nora Fenn had 17 months left on her doctoral dissertation, $4,300 left in her bank account before the next tuition payment became a crisis, and exactly one viable source of income: the twice-weekly cleaning contract for the Rhys family's Lakeview mansion that paid enough to cover rent with $40 left over for food if she was disciplined about it. Which she was, because discipline was the only thing standing between her and her mother's increasingly specific suggestions about moving back to Rockford. She was not moving back to Rockford. It was a Friday morning in October when Calder Rhys walked into his own kitchen at 7:45 and said the 7 words that reorganized the rest of her year. "I need a wife now. Come with me." She was mopping the floor at the time. She finished the section she was working on before she looked up, because the floor was going to need to dry, regardless of what was happening with his crisis. She leaned the mop against the counter. He was in the charcoal board meeting suit. Not the Navy stakes were high, and he had the expression of a man who had been awake since 4 processing something that hadn't processed cleanly. His phone was still lit. "That's a sentence with a lot of assumptions in it," she said. He looked at her the way people looked at furniture when furniture made an unexpected sound. "The Hartwell contract signing is tonight. Their people specifically require demonstrated domestic stability from both parties. The person I was planning to bring is currently photographed with someone else at an event in Scottsdale. I need someone tonight. Car comes in 40 minutes. She thought about the chapter sitting half-finished on her laptop. She thought about the $4,300. She thought about the Hartwell contract, which she knew from a financial publication relevant to Chapter 3 of a dissertation on structural inequality in family-held corporations. She thought about the specific irony of the man whose corporation she was writing about, asking her to save his negotiation. "Before I answer," she said, "I want to establish terms." "Terms? 3 of them. Do you want them now, or after you've decided whether you're taking me seriously?" He looked at her. "Now. 1 duration. Maximum 6 weeks. I have commitments that don't move." She didn't specify the nature of the commitments. 2 compensation. $12,000. Half up front. Half at the end of the 6 weeks, or when the Hartwell contract is signed, whichever comes first. She had done the calculation while he said, $12,000 covered remaining tuition, 2 months of rent, and a margin for the unexpected. 3. Operational control. Every public appearance. Minimum 4 hours notice and a full briefing on who will be there and what the objective is. I don't walk into rooms without information. She paused. Non-negotiable. The kitchen was quiet for approximately 4 seconds. "You're the cleaning person," he said. "I'm the person in your kitchen with terms. Are you interested or not?" He was reassessing something. She recognized the quality of it from academic committee meetings, the recalibration of a person whose model had just received incompatible data. She waited. She was good at waiting. 12,000. Yes, for 6 weeks. Maximum. Could be less if the contract closes faster. She picked up her phone. "I'll need the first 6,000 transferred before I get into the car." He stared at her. She thought he might refuse, not because the terms were unreasonable, but because he was unused to being the less prepared person in a room. She let him star. She did not fill the silence. He took out his own phone. "Send the account information." She sent it. The transfer confirmation arrived on her screen before he'd finished looking at his. She untied her apron, hung it on the hook, and picked up her jacket. Reaching into the pocket for her transit card, she became aware that he'd noticed something. He was looking at the pocket, not at her. The edge of a manila envelope showed the university seal visible at the corner. She'd been carrying it 3 days, forgetting to leave it at the apartment. She smoothed the jacket closed. He had seen it. He didn't ask. She filed the not asking. 35 minutes, she said, and left. The apartment was 12 minutes away. Jin was out, which was fortunate. She went to the closet and looked at what she owned, with the efficient eye of someone who had been dressing for rooms she didn't belong in long enough to know what worked. She had one dress appropriate for a formal business dinner worn to her undergraduate thesis presentation, 2 job interviews, and her grandfather's funeral. It fit all 3 occasions because it was the color of authority, and it didn't try to be more than it was. She put it on, found the earrings her mother had never asked back, looked in the mirror for 3 seconds. She looked like someone who could stand next to Calder Rhys without the room questioning it. That was the requirement. She was back in 32 minutes. The car was there. A single page sat on the seat between them, not the full briefing she'd requested, but the functional core. Names, position, objectives, what the Hartwell people valued, and what they were known to dislike. She read it while the car moved. "What's the story about us?" she said. "Together. 8 months. Privately. How did we meet? I hadn't decided. Through a mutual friend in the academic world. I'm finishing a graduate degree. You keep your personal life separate from your professional one. Which is why this hasn't been public." She looked back at the page. The Hartwell patriarch in the room, or observing. His son Evan handles negotiations, but reports back. What does the patriarch value? Competence and discretion. Built the company from a regional hardware chain. So don't perform. Be what you are. She read the briefing to the end. What you are is the CEO of a company that's been in your family 3 generations, and that you've kept solvent through 2 recessions. That's what the patriarch sees. He was quiet. She watched him make the adjustment in the car window reflection, and she returned to the briefing page. The event was at a private club downtown, the kind of place where the carpets absorbed sound and the staff moved like people whose job was to be invisible unless needed. She had read about places like this in academic papers. She had not been inside one. She registered the gap between the reading and the experience, walked in at Calder's side, and let none of it show on her face, because composure was a professional skill, regardless of the profession. The Hartwell party was already there, 2 men in their late 40s with the easy posture of lifelong money, and a woman whose function was unclear from the introductions, but whose attention was the sharpest in the room. Nora filed her separately. Evan Hartwell was 41, slightly nervous under the professional surface, with the nervousness that came from a father who was always observing. The second man was legal. She learned this from the quality of his listening, which was the listening of someone building a record. She shook hands, said the correct things in the correct register, and felt the room settle into its intended configuration. 2 parties at approximate social equilibrium. Somewhere in the 2nd hour, when the negotiation had moved from dinner conversation toward substance, she looked up and found Calder looking at her. Not the peripheral check of someone monitoring a social arrangement. He was looking at her with the specific quality of someone seeing for the first time something that had been in front of them for a significant period. She had seen this expression in seminar rooms. When an abstract concept suddenly became concrete, she looked back at him for 1 beat long enough to acknowledge it without performing anything, and then she looked away and made a small, calibrated comment to the Hartwell woman that redirected the room's energy toward the next phase of the conversation. In the car afterward, the city going past in the particular way it did when something had been resolved rather than postponed. He said, "Who are you?" "The person in your kitchen with terms." That's not an answer. It's the answer that applies tonight. She looked out the window. The Hartwell woman, the one whose function was unclear. She's the one the patriarch sent. She's the actual observer. Evan doesn't know. He was quiet. She watched you most carefully when you weren't speaking. People show more of themselves in the listening than in the talking. I know that. Then you know she liked what she saw. She watched the street lights. The contract will close. You sound sure. I'm sure about what I observed. The rest is your work. The car reached the mansion. She got out. I'll be here Tuesday for the regular schedule. If you need me before then, 4 hours notice. Same terms. She walked to the transit stop without waiting for a response. On the train home, she opened her laptop and wrote 2 sentences into chapter 3. Then she closed it and looked at the Chicago night going past and thought, I am going to need to be careful about what I let this become. This situation is interesting. I am less reliably good at remaining detached from situations when they're interesting. She filed this under variables requiring monitoring and looked at the window until she got home. She did not move back to Rockford. The Tuesday after the event, she arrived at the mansion at her regular time. The library had the best Wi-Fi she had access to outside the university, and nobody had ever told her she couldn't use it. Improvised permissions were how most things in her life had been obtained, and if you used a thing respectfully and returned it better than you found it, the question of formal authorization rarely came up. She was setting up in the kitchen when Calder came in from the study. Casual clothes. Working from home version still communicated the same thing as everything else he wore, which was that none of it had happened by accident. He looked at her. You're here, he said. Tuesday. As discussed. She was filling the sink. I wanted to talk to you about the event. She turned off the water. Is there a problem? No. Evan Hartwell called this morning. His observer was very favorable. I thought she would be. She told Evan my partner showed an unusual quality of attention. I pay attention. Professional Abbott. She turned the water back on. He was still standing there. Something else. He told her about 3 more events in the next month, a family dinner, a charity gala, a closing dinner, and possibly a weekend at the Hartwell property in Door County. She said, $4,000 to the back end for the weekend. He agreed quickly. You're agreeing fast, she said. You're right about your value in these situations. I saw that Friday. I'm not going to undervalue something I've already seen demonstrated. She turned this over. It was, she thought, the most accurate thing he had said to her in 2 years of working in his house. She said, What's the family dinner? He told her. Constance, his grandmother, who lived in the house, the cousin Fletcher and his wife Penny, visiting from London, the family's financial advisor Stanton, who had been with them long enough to know when something was being performed. She asked for anything she needed to know about Fletcher's wife, because getting names right was one of the fastest ways to establish warmth. What's your grandmother's name? She said. Constance. Tell me one thing she genuinely respects. He thought about it. Honesty that costs something. She received this and filed it carefully, in a separate drawer from the rest, because it was the piece of information that would matter most and that she would need to be most careful with. 7 o'clock, she said, and went back to the dishes. He left the kitchen. She stood at the sink and thought about honesty that costs something, and about the manila envelope that had been in her pocket Friday morning, and about the dissertation on her laptop, which was at this point the most detailed analysis of the Rhys Holdings structural power dynamics that had ever been written. She thought about what would happen if anyone in this house saw it. She thought that the arrangement was clean and self-contained and bounded by terms she had written herself. She thought that the most important thing she could do was to be exactly what she had said she was no more, no less, and to leave when the time was up. She was very good at leaving when the time was up. She had been doing it her whole life. She washed the dishes. She moved through the house with 2 years' worth of knowing its rhythms. She did not go into the study. She cleaned the library last, because she loved the library. and as she was dusting books, she stopped at the economics section, ran her fingers along the spines, pulled out a 2019 paper collection on corporate governance that included a chapter she had cited 4 times, held it a moment, put it back, finished the library, closed her laptop, left. The family dinner was on Thursday. She arrived at 6:55 on time, in the way that preceded the event, by enough to be composed without being anxious. Calder met her at the door, which told her something about the level of his concern about the evening. She said, "Briefing." He walked her through it on the way to the dining room. The cousin Fletcher, whose wife Penny had met him in London's arts administration sector and had an acute sensitivity to being underestimated. She committed this to the relevant category. Constance Rhys was already at the table, small, wearing her age, with the specific disregard of someone who found the categories other people worried about insufficiently interesting. She looked at Nora when Nora came in, and the look said immediately that this was a woman who would not be receiving a performed version of anything. "Mrs. Rhys," Nora said, "I've been looking forward to this." "No, you haven't. But I appreciate the impulse." She gestured toward the chair to her left. "Sit here. Fletcher can manage without the best chair." Nora sat. Across the table, Calder was watching her with the expression she couldn't yet categorize. She looked back at Constance. "Tell me about the family business," she said. "From your perspective." The table went quiet. Penny was the first to recover, which told Nora that Penny had been in rooms with Constance before and knew that Constance's satisfaction with a question was the best possible start to an evening. Constance picked up her wine and looked at Nora with something that wasn't warmth, but was the specific quality of sustained interest from a person who didn't give it easily. "Now that," Constance said, "is a question nobody has asked me at this table in a long time." She said it for 20 minutes, and Nora listened with the full attention she brought to primary source material. And the dinner proceeded from there, everyone in the room slightly better than they'd expected to be. The conversation moving with the ease of a system working correctly. Nora glanced at Calder once. He was looking at her again with the expression she couldn't categorize. She thought, "Stop looking at me like you're trying to work out what I am. You're not going to work it out tonight." She looked back at Constance and asked another question. The social calendar of the arrangement was not something she had anticipated managing when she set the original terms. She had imagined events, the Hartwell signing, perhaps 1 or 2 others, with the clean linearity of a project with defined deliverables. What she had not imagined was the texture of the in-between the Tuesdays and Fridays that were still cleaning days, which she said, because stopping them mid-arrangement would have required an explanation she didn't want to give. And because the work was hers, and the rhythm of it was steadying in a way she hadn't expected to need. She cleaned the kitchen and the library and the rooms that ran along the east wing, and she thought about structural analysis and about compensation, differentials, and about the specific quality of the morning light at 7:30. In a house she was beginning to know too well. On the 5th Tuesday, Aldrich, the housekeeper, who was not actually named Aldrich, and who she had miscategorized from the beginning as a butler, when he was in fact something more operational, came to the kitchen while she was working and said, without particular ceremony, that he'd put a desk in the library's east alcove. She looked at him. He looked back with the quality of someone delivering information that has already been decided. "The Wi-Fi signal is stronger there," he said, "and the afternoon light won't glare on your screen. I didn't ask for a desk," she said. "I know." He went back to whatever he'd been doing. She stood in the kitchen with the question of who had asked for the desk on her behalf, and arrived at the obvious conclusion and thought, "That is not something I asked for, and it is also useful, and I am going to let it be both of those things, without making it into a conversation." She used the desk. The afternoon light was indeed correct. She thought about the desk for 3 days. She thought about it the way she thought about everything she filed under variables requiring monitoring, not obsessively, but with the specific sustained attention of someone building a picture from partial information. A person who arranged a desk because the light was better was either thoughtful or managing her. And she had learned in 3 years of graduate school that the difference between thoughtful and managing often came down to what the other person got from it. She could not identify what Calder got from her having the right light for her screen. This bothered her less than it should have, which was itself information. She thought, I need to update the monitoring frequency on this variable. She went back to chapter 3. He came to the library on the 6th evening, not the study, not the kitchen, the library, which he seemed to use as a reference collection rather than a reading room. Something to be consulted and returned from. He came in while she was still at the east alcove desk, and he stopped when he saw her. And the stopping was different from the first library visit. This time, there was no recalibration required. She was simply in the room, and his presence adjusted to include her. He went to the shelf he needed. He found the volume. On his way out, the desk is working. Yes, thank you. He nodded and left. She sat at the desk and thought that was 12 words between us in a library at 6 in the evening. And I thought about it for the next 4 hours. She thought this is what Jin was warning me about. She thought, I know. She went back to the chapter. She wrote 2 paragraphs, and they were accurate, and she was not satisfied with accurate. She wanted good. And she knew the difference between the two, and she knew which one required more of her to achieve, and she stayed at the desk until she achieved it. The charity gala in the 3rd week was different from the Hartwell dinner, in the way that all large events were different from the specific ones, more surface to cover. More room for things to move through the cracks. She wore the blue dress again because she had made the decision, and it was a good decision, and she was not going to second-guess a good decision. He looked at her when she came to the door, and he was doing the thing where he was being careful not to look, which she noticed because she noticed everything, and because careful not looking, from someone as generally deliberate as Calder Rhys, was its own form of looking. She didn't comment. They got in the car. The gala had a silent auction component, which she navigated without bidding on anything, because she was not in a position to bid on things, and because navigating around the bidding in a crowd of people who were doing it required a specific quality of attention that she found useful as a warm-up for the room reading. That was the actual work of the evening. She moved with him through the initial reception, and she thought the clusters and the way they formed and reformed, and she thought which ones Calder was moved through and which ones moved around him. And she thought 3 people who watched the movements from outside the clusters, which was the position of people who were either unimportant or very important. And she made a quiet assessment of which was which. Later. In the car, the woman in the green dress, standing near the column for most of the first hour. Marina Letts, he said. She's on the City Planning Commission. She was watching the room the same way I was, not socially analytically. She's building something. He looked at her. She's building a coalition for the harbor redevelopment proposal that's going to the full commission next month. And the man she had the 3-minute conversation with near the bar, he controls 2 of the 7 votes she needs. He was quiet for a moment. You got all of that from one evening. I was paying attention. I was in the room the entire evening. You were doing your job. My job was watching you do it. She looked at the city going past. She's going to get the coalition. The man at the bar left the conversation looking like someone who had received information he found more valuable than he expected. That's the look of someone whose resistance has just become softer than his public position. He said nothing for a long moment. She thought he might push back on the assessment, which would have been interesting because she was confident in it. But he didn't. You're going to be very good at whatever you do with the research, he said, after the dissertation. I already am, she said, which was accurate, and not arrogant, and she thought he heard the difference, because he nodded once, in the way he nodded when he received information without dispute. She looked back out the window. She thought that was also the most direct thing I have said about my own work in a non-academic context, and I said it without managing it first. And it landed correctly. She thought, update the variable. There was also the matter of the Hartwell lunch, which happened on the Friday of the second week, and which she had prepared for with the same attention she prepared for everything she was uncertain about, which was to read what was available on Clara Hartwell's litigation practice, and to think carefully about what Clara would want from a conversation that wasn't about the Hartwell's subsidiary acquisition. She arrived with 3 things. She was genuinely curious about the impact assessment methodology Clara's firm used, the question of how environmental litigation interacted with corporate governance structures, and whether Clara thought the recent regulatory shifts were going to hold. These were not conversation tactics. She was genuinely curious about all 3, because her dissertation intersected with all 3, because she had been studying the regulatory environment around corporate governance for 4 years, and Clara Hartwell had been working in it for 11. What she hadn't prepared for was Clara turning to her 20 minutes in and saying, "You understand the governance side of this better than most lawyers I work with. What's your background?" She told her. Graduate program. Economics. Corporate governance as specialty. Dissertation in final stage. Clara said, "Rhys Holdings is in your research." Not an accusation, a question with the quality of someone who finds that information interesting rather than problematic. "1 chapter," Nora said. "Primary case study." Clara nodded once, in the way of someone filing information accurately. They talked about the dissertation for approximately 8 minutes, during which Clara asked 2 questions about methodology that were the right questions, and Evan and Calder talked about the acquisition timeline across the table. And at some point, Nora became aware that the lunch had stopped being a performance of any kind and had become a conversation, and that this was the first lunch of the arrangement that had that quality. On the drive back, after she had told Calder about Clara's environmental compliance work, "You are very comfortable telling me useful things about the people I work with," he said. "You're welcome. That's not what I said. It's what you meant." He looked at her in the car window reflection. He was doing the not-looking thing again. She looked back at it, and then looked away at the city. She thought, "Comfortable is the wrong word. I am very precise about useful things. The precision is not the same as comfort." She thought about saying this, and then thought about the distinction between what was true and what was necessary to say out loud, which was an editorial decision she had to make many times a day. And she thought, not necessary. She let it go. She watched the city, and she thought about Clara Hartwell, and about impact litigation, and about the regulatory environment, and about Chapter 3, which was almost done. And she thought, this arrangement is producing field research I could not have conducted any other way. She thought that is both a professional observation and something else entirely. She thought, I know which one I should be focusing on. The second week of the arrangement was structurally similar to the first, but qualitatively different in the way that second weeks always were the initial strangeness, smoothing into familiarity, without yet becoming comfortable enough to stop being informative. She came on Tuesday and Friday for cleaning, Wednesday evening for an event, and she moved through all 3 with the precise efficiency she brought to everything. She noticed the books in the study had been moved, not rearranged, moved in the way of a person who had taken them down without full attention because their attention was elsewhere. 2 of them were in corporate governance. One was a text on economic inequality she happened to know well because she had cited it. She didn't comment. She returned them to their correct positions and thought about it for the rest of the Tuesday. She noticed Calder had begun arriving in rooms slightly after she expected him to. She could not determine whether this was intentional or incidental. She filed it, without conclusion. She noticed that the Wednesday event, a cocktail reception for a technology partnership, had a guest list overlapping with approximately 20% of the people she'd read about in relation to Rhys Holdings, and she had to calibrate her expression carefully when introduced to 3 of them. 2 were subjects of specific analysis in Chapter 2. One had been the subject of a footnote about informal power transmission that she'd revised 4 times before getting the phrasing right. She smiled, shook hands, said the appropriate things, stored the footnote revision for later. She noticed that a man she hadn't seen before appeared at the periphery of her attention in the 2nd hour, medium height, well-dressed, with the watchfulness of someone there for a purpose beyond the stated one. She thought it, couldn't place the purpose. Noted that when Calder introduced her to the room, the watchful man tracked her with slightly more attention than the situation warranted. She filed it under incomplete information. What she didn't notice until much later, the watchful man had been introduced as Marcus Weld. On the Tuesday of the 2nd week, cleaning the kitchen while Calder worked in the study, he appeared in the doorway. "The number in the Hartwell report's 3rd quarter projection," he said. "The one you caught at the dinner. How much have you looked at the family company's financial disclosures? I've read the public filings. For what purpose general interest in how large corporations structure their reporting?" He looked at her for a moment. She met it with the composure she'd learned was necessary when you were in a room with someone very good at reading faces and you were holding more information than you'd disclosed. "You have general interest in a lot of things," he said. "I do." She went back to the counter. The financial report incident had happened 3 days after the Hartwell reception. At a corporate dinner where Calder was presenting a progress overview, she had been listening with divided attention, researcher and observer simultaneously, and she heard him cite a number in the 3rd quarter projection that was slightly off from the public filing she'd read 3 months ago for Chapter 2. Not dramatically off, the kind of off that could be a rounding adjustment. But her internal error-checking flagged it the way it always did. She wrote it on a cocktail napkin, slid it to him during a moment when the room's attention was elsewhere. He looked at it, looked at her, and adjusted the number in the next sentence with the smoothness of someone very good at not letting a correction look like a correction. "In the car after. How did you catch that?" The number was inconsistent with the year-end total on the filing. He'd been quiet for a moment. "You remembered the year-end total on a filing you read. I read things carefully." He hadn't said anything else until they reached the mansion. She thought about that drive on and off for the following week. She thought about what he was beginning to understand about her, and whether the understanding was going to move faster than she wanted. She was very clear about the plan: complete the Hartwell negotiation, collect the 2nd half, go back to the dissertation and the apartment and her regular life. She said to be clear about it until approximately the 9th day of the arrangement. The 9th day was a library afternoon. She had been allocated informal use of the library space on working days. She suspected it had been suggested by Calder rather than the housekeeper. But she didn't question it, because the library had superior Wi-Fi and the afternoon light was exactly right. She was reading through Chapter 3, printed out for annotation, when she heard footsteps in the hall, and then the library door opened. "Oh," he said. He had not known she was there. She had not moved quickly enough to look like she wasn't working on something. He looked at the printed pages. She looked back at him with the composure she'd been calibrating for situations exactly like this one, and said, "Aldridge said the library was available. It is." He was still looking at the pages. She turned them face down on the desk. Not urgently, that would have been more telling, but with the unhurried motion of someone tidying their workspace. "I came to find a book," he said. "Economics section is on the north wall. 2nd and 3rd shelves." He looked at her. "How do you know where the economics section is?" "I've cleaned this room for 2 years." He went to the north wall, found the book, Left. She sat with the turned-over pages for a moment and thought he noticed. She gathered the pages, put them in her bag, and made a mental note to work on Chapter 3 at the university library going forward. She told Jin about the arrangement on the night of the 10th day, because the not-telling was taking more energy than it should. Jin was her roommate, a law student, someone who asked the right questions in the right order. Nora sat on the kitchen floor. Jin was already there with her casebook, the floor being where they defaulted for significant conversations and told her everything. The 7 words, the terms, the family dinner, the cocktail reception, the financial filing, the library afternoon. Jin listened to all of it. When Nora finished, "You're doing a fake engagement for the CEO of the company your dissertation is about. Temporary relationship, not engagement. Does he know about the dissertation? No. Are you going to tell him when the 6 weeks are done and I'm no longer in proximity to anything that could be complicated by the information?" "Yes. And if something happens before the 6 weeks are done, nothing is going to happen." Jin looked at her over the casebook. "The things you say with absolute certainty are always the things that happen. I'll take that risk under advisement. You're going to fall in love with him. I'm going to finish my dissertation and submit it and get my degree and get a postdoctoral fellowship somewhere with a good economics department. My personal life will continue to be the last item on the operational priority list." "Right. Sure." Jin picked up the casebook. "Nothing is going to happen." Nora went to her room. She worked on Chapter 3 until 2 in the morning. She thought about the library afternoon and the quality of his attention when he looked at the pages she'd turned face down. And she told herself nothing was going to happen. And then she stopped thinking about it, which was itself a kind of information. On the 12th day, Calder found her in the library again. He had knocked this time. He came in and sat in the chair across from her, which meant he wasn't there for a book. "The Hartwells want to have lunch," he said. "Informal. The 4 of us, you and me. Evan and his wife." When he told her, "Same terms. Same terms." He was looking at the desk. She had her notepad out, dense, with abbreviations she'd developed over years of fast seminar notes, which looked to anyone else like private shorthand that could be almost anything. "What are you working on?" "Research." "On what?" "Corporate governance structures." She kept her voice level. "My area is economic structures in family-held corporations. The ways power is maintained or distributed across generations, and what that does to the people inside and outside the structure. Are you looking at any specific companies?" She looked at him. "Several. As case studies. Does Rhys Holdings come up? It's a well-documented example of a multi-generational family corporation." "That's a yes." He looked at the notepad. "But you didn't mention it when you agreed to the arrangement. You didn't ask about my research." "No, I didn't." He met her eyes. "Is there a conflict of interest here that I should know about?" "The research is academic. It has no stake in your business outcomes. A conflict of interest requires competing interests, and my interest is writing an accurate analysis, which is compatible with the Hartwell contract closing successfully." She paused. "If you're asking whether I came to work in your house specifically to gather research material, no. I came because it paid well and the schedule worked around the dissertation. The 2 things have existed in parallel. But you've been aware of the parallel." "Yes." He was quiet for longer than before. "The lunch with the Hartwells is Friday, 12:30. He stood. At the door, Nora. "Yes. I'm going to need a few days to think about what you just told me." "That's reasonable." He left. She sat with the notepad and the quiet library and thought about the conversation she'd been careful about, which had happened anyway, at an angle she hadn't anticipated, and that she had answered accurately, if not completely. She packed up. She went home. She called Jin. "I told you," Jin said. "I know." Nora said. "What are you going to do? Finish the chapter, and then figure out the rest as it comes." The lunch with Evan Hartwell and his wife Clara was the most genuinely enjoyable professional meal Nora had attended since her department's end-of-year colloquium. Clara was an environmental lawyer who had been doing impact litigation for 11 years. With the quality of someone who had spent a career saying the thing that made everyone uncomfortable, and who had stopped feeling uncomfortable about that quite some time ago. They established an immediate rapport, both recognized within the first 20 minutes that the other person was accustomed to operating in rooms where they were expected to be less than they were. And that recognition was its own connection. In the car going back, Calder said, "You like her?" "Yes. That's not a required part of the arrangement." "I know. It happened anyway." She looked at the window. "Clara Hartwell is going to be a useful long-term contact for your company's environmental compliance work if you expand the sustainability reporting. She's done more in that space than her husband knows." "How do you know about our sustainability reporting?" She looked at him. "The public filings," he said. "The sustainability section reads like it was written by a legal department trying to avoid liability rather than a company with an actual position on the topic. It won't hold up in the next round of regulatory changes." He was quiet for a moment. "You've been writing about corporate governance for 4 years. "Yes. And for how many of those 4 years have you been cleaning houses to pay for it?" 3.5. He was quiet again. She looked out the window. "It pays well enough and it's quiet. Some of my best thinking happens when I'm doing something physically repetitive. You do your best thinking in my house, among other places. I don't know what to do with that." "You don't need to do anything with it. It's just true. You're very comfortable with true things. I'm an academic. True things are the unit of currency." He almost smiled at that. She could see it at the corner of his expression. The specific quality of something almost arriving, and then not quite. And she looked back out the window. She thought, "I need to stop noticing the things at the corners of his expressions." She thought too late for that. The arrangement moved into its 3rd week. On a Tuesday, Constance came to the kitchen. Not to talk to Nora. Technically, she came for tea. Made it. And sat at the island watching Nora reorganize the pantry with the unfazed quality of a woman who had lived in this house for 6 years and owned it in the sense that mattered, which was the sense of history. Nora worked, and Constance drank her tea, and for 10 minutes neither of them said anything. Then, "You're very careful about what you say," Constance said. "I try to be precise. That's the same thing. But I noticed you're careful in the way of someone who knows something. Not someone who's hiding something. There's a difference." "Is there? Hiding something is about protection. Knowing something is about timing." She drank her tea, which is more interesting. She finished and stood. "At the door I read something interesting in here once. On the counter. It was very good. Very honest about difficult things." She left. Nora stood in the kitchen and thought about the dissertation pages she had left on the counter 3 weeks ago, before the arrangement. Before any of this, because she'd been annotating a printout while the floor dried and had stepped out to take a call from her advisor and hadn't gone back for the pages. She thought about which pages they had been. She thought that very honest about difficult things, from Calder Rhys, was both the most valuable and the most complicated assessment her work had received to date. She closed the pantry. She thought about timing. Marcus Weld appeared at the 2nd reception of the 3rd week, a charity event for a children's hospital foundation, already in the room when they arrived. He navigated to her within 40 minutes. She'd looked him up after the first reception and knew who he was now. A minority shareholder in 2 Rhys Holdings subsidiaries with a specific track record of leveraging adjacent interests into central ones. A footnote category she had written. He appeared beside her during a moment when Calder was across the room. "Ms. Fenn," he said. "Mr. Welt." The quality of his attention toward her had changed since the first meeting. "How are you finding the world of business development?" "Informative, I imagine. You have a—" he paused. "Specific background for it." "Most people do." "Yes, but not everyone's background is as directly relevant as yours." He smiled in the way he had the first time, with no warmth in it, and moved away. She watched him go. "He knows," she thought. "How much does he know, and how long has he known it, and what is he planning to do with it?" She thought, "I need to tell Calder before Marcus does." She thought this, and then I need to decide when and how and what the telling accomplishes, because the timing of disclosure matters as much as the disclosure itself. She thought about timing all evening. On the drive home, she was quieter than usual, and Calder noticed. "Is something wrong?" he said. "I need to think about something. Can I help?" "No, but thank you." He let it go. She thought that too. He let things go when he was told to. He did not press. She thought, that is useful information for what I'm about to need to do. On the 14th day, something quiet happened. She was in the library working on Chapter 3 when she heard him on the phone in the study. Not trying to hear, the door was open. She was 3 feet away. He said, clearly, "No, I'm not confirming anything about her research, because it's hers and she gets to decide what she discloses and when." She stopped. A pause. Then Marcus. "I'm not in the business of trading other people's information. Whatever you think you know about Nora's academic work, take it up with her directly if you feel you need to." Another pause. His voice, when it came again. He had a quality she hadn't heard from him before. "And if you're planning to make this an issue at the Hartwell dinner, I'd suggest reconsidering. The contract is close to closing, and neither of us benefits from disruption." A shorter pause. "Goodbye, Marcus." The phone went down. She made herself move. She went to the supply closet, put the last items away, closed it, walked back through the study hallway, and thought he defended something she hadn't given him. She thought, tonight. I'm going to tell him tonight. She found him in the kitchen at 5. "I heard part of your phone call," she said. "I know." He was making coffee and didn't look up. "Marcus Weld knows about the dissertation. More than he should." "How did he?" "University database. Your preliminary research statement is on record. Your advisor's name is public." He put it together. "The content is yours. I told him that." "I know. I heard." She looked at him across the kitchen. The late afternoon light, doing what it always did, and she had never paid attention to it in quite this specific way before. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I was going to. I was choosing the timing, to minimize disruption to both of us. Is there anything in the dissertation that would disrupt the Hartwell contract?" She thought about it honestly. The dissertation argues that multi-generational family corporations create structural barriers to labor, mobility, and equitable compensation at the lower organizational levels, using multiple companies as illustrative cases. Rhys Holdings is one of the cases. The analysis is based on public data and is not editorial, it's structural. Structural, meaning it describes what exists. Structural, meaning it describes what exists and asks why the structure persists and who benefits from the persistence. That's an editorial position. All structural analysis is, at some level. The question is whether the analysis is accurate. Is it yes? He held her look for a moment. "I thought it might be," he said. And something in the way he said it, without defensiveness, without the management she'd watched him apply to other rooms, landed differently from anything he'd said before. She looked back at the counter. She thought about what it meant to have someone say, "I thought it might be," to a description of how their own company worked. She thought that was also information, and that she was going to need a new ledger category for it. That evening at dinner, without looking up from the estate accounts, Tell me something you haven't told anyone in this house." He looked at her across the fire. "The library. I reorganized it when I was 14 because I had been reading in a particular order and wanted to preserve it." "What order?" "Everything about a subject before moving to the next. History before, philosophy before, mathematics before, architecture before everything else." "Did you finish?" "I'm still in architecture." She looked up then. He was looking at the fire. She thought about a 14-year-old building a system that would take him past 37 years old to complete. And she thought, contained. The same word as before. "I've never read systematically," she said. "I read whatever is interesting at the moment." "How do you know what's interesting?" "It presents itself. You recognize it. You trust that. It hasn't failed me yet." He looked at her then, away from the fire, and the expression had no ledger in it at all. "No," he said. "I imagine it hasn't." She looked back at the accounts. The fire continued. She thought I should update the ledger. The present value is higher than I estimated. She slept well that night. She noticed this because she hadn't always slept well in the first weeks. The inventory her mind performed at 3 in the morning was getting shorter, not because there was less to account for, but because the categorization was improving. She was getting better at knowing where things went. She thought knowing where things went, in this particular situation, was going to matter more than she'd initially estimated. She adjusted accordingly and went to sleep. The 23rd day was the day the morning conversation shifted permanently. She came to the study with a question about a discrepancy in the estate accounts from 14 months prior, a historical entry that didn't correspond to any project she could identify. "The East Garden," he said. "There's no East Garden." "No. It was planned. The contractor failed to complete it, and the funds were partially recovered but not fully." He looked at the entry. The plan was abandoned. "Why?" "It was designed for someone who wasn't here anymore." She thought about a garden planned and abandoned, and an entry that was neither completed nor removed, just sitting in the books as a record of something that had been intended. "Your wife," she said. "My first wife." "Yes. She died 6 years ago." He said it with the specific quality of someone for whom 6 years had been sufficient to integrate the fact, but not make it weightless. She understood this. She understood the difference between time that healed and time that simply accumulated around a thing until the thing was no longer in the foreground. "I'm sorry," she said. Was she also an arrangement? She hadn't planned to ask that. He looked at her. "No. I chose her without the frame of any arrangement. The choice was less considered than it should have been. When she died, I made a decision that subsequent choices would be more deliberate." She looked at the account entry. "What made me the deliberate choice?" He looked at her across the desk. "A question I'm not quite ready to answer today." "But you will." "Yes. All right." She made the correcting note. She said with the accounts. He said with his work. The east light moved across the room the way it moved every morning. Tracking time, without a clock. And she thought about Elena and the abandoned garden and deliberate choices and the information she didn't have yet. And she thought that she was accumulating the context required to receive it when it came, and that the accumulation itself was its own form of being chosen. She thought about the economics section of the library on and off for a week, after she noticed the books had been moved. She thought about it with the specific attention she gave to anomalies in data not alarmed, but noting it, running the hypothesis that someone had pulled the books she knew and put them back slightly off, which meant someone had been looking at the books she was citing. She had no way to verify the hypothesis. She filed it next to the knot, asking about the university envelope and the desk in the east alcove, in the category she had been developing for things she knew without being able to prove, which was the most uncomfortable category she maintained. On the Friday of the 3rd week, she came to the mansion and found Constance in the study, not the kitchen, not the sitting room, the study, where Constance had apparently been reviewing a set of financial documents with Calder before he left for a morning meeting and had simply stayed. Nora knocked on the open door before entering with the cleaning caddy, and Constance looked up from the documents and said, "Come in. I'm not leaving." "Nora, come in." She started with the windowsills, which were the part of the study that required the most attention because Calder kept the windows cracked for airflow, and the sills collected what city air collected on a windowsill in October. Constance watched her for approximately 3 minutes, which Nora felt but did not acknowledge, because acknowledging being watched was something you did when the watching made you uncomfortable. And the watching didn't make her uncomfortable. It made her interested. "You clean this room differently from the others," Constance said. "It has different surfaces." "That's not what I mean. You're more careful in here." Nora looked at the windowsill she was cleaning. "It's the room that gets used most. Things that get used most need more attention to stay well." Constance returned to her documents. A few minutes passed. He reorganized this room twice since Elena died. The first time he took everything out and started from scratch. The second time he put things back in approximately the order they'd been in, but not exactly. She didn't look up from the documents. I don't think he noticed the difference. Nora finished the windowsill. She moved to the next one. She thought about a man reorganizing a room twice after losing someone and not quite recovering the original order. And she thought about that being the kind of detail a grandmother noticed and kept for the right occasion. And she thought that this was a very specific kind of love, the kind that kept small facts against the possibility that they would someday be useful to say. She said, "The books in the economics section of the library, the ones that look like they've been handled recently." She said it to the windowsill, not to Constance. A pause. "He started in economics about a week ago," Constance said. "He was in architecture for quite a long time. He seems to have skipped ahead." Nora finished the sill. She moved to the desk surface, which required a different approach, careful around the papers, not displacing anything, cleaning the edges and the areas of clear surface without touching the working layer. "He reorganizes by subject," she said. "Everything about a subject before moving to the next." "I know. I watched him do it when he was 14. Another pause. "He's been moving faster than usual lately." Nora said nothing. She finished the desk surface. She moved to the shelves, dusting them in the methodical progression she had developed for this room. Constance turned a page of the financial documents. The study held them both in its particular quiet, which was the quiet of a room where work happened, and where two people were conducting independent assessments of the same situation from opposite corners. And neither of them was going to say the conclusion out loud. She thought about the conversation in the study, the one with Constance, the one about the books and the reorganization for several days after. She thought about it not because it required action, but because it had the quality of information that was still being processed, like a data set that you had to let rest before the patterns in it became legible. She thought about what it meant for Constance to have told her that the economics section had been touched. And she thought about what it meant for Constance to have delivered that information with the specific casualness of someone who is prepared exactly how casual to be. And she thought Constance Rhys has been managing information about her grandson for 6 years, and she is very good at it, and she is choosing, right now, to give me some of it. She thought, why? She thought, probably because she wants to see what I'll do with it. She did nothing with it for 4 days. On the 5th day, she went to the economics section of the library, and she pulled the book on economic inequality that she had cited, and she opened it, and she looked at the pages that had been handled. They had the slightly warmer feel of pages that had been turned. Recently, which was not imagined, was a real phenomenon she had noticed in library books for years, and she thought he read this. She put the book back in its place. She left the library. She went to the kitchen to collect her cleaning supplies, and she ran into Calder in the hallway, which was unusual because he was usually in the study at this hour. He was carrying a book. The book was the paper collection on corporate governance from 2019, the one with the chapter she had cited 4 times. He was carrying it in the way of someone who had been walking with it long enough that the carrying had become absent-minded rather than intentional, not going somewhere with the book. Just having it. He saw her and stopped. "I checked it out of the library," he said. "It's your library." "I know. I meant I took it from the economics section." She looked at the book. She thought about what it meant that he was explaining himself, which was something he had not done before in 2 years of occupying the same house. "It's a good collection," she said. "The chapter on governance accountability in the 3rd generation is particularly well-sourced." He looked at the book. He looked at her. He said, "Which chapter number is that?" "Chapter 7. He opened the book to chapter 7. He looked at the first page for a moment. He closed it. "I'll put it back when I'm done," he said. "It's your library," she said again. She went to the kitchen. She thought, "He is reading the things I cite." She thought, "I should update the frequency of monitoring on several variables simultaneously." She thought, "The monitoring is becoming a courtesy function at this point, and I should probably just admit that to myself." She made herself start with the counter surfaces. The kitchen required sustained effort. She gave it what it required. She thought about the 23rd day conversation, the one about Elena and the East Garden, and the deliberate choice for the rest of that week. She thought about it with the specific sustained attention she gave to things she needed to understand before she knew what to do with them. She thought about what it meant for a person to describe a subsequent choice as more deliberate than the one before it. And she thought about what deliberate looked like in practice from someone who was already the most deliberate person she had encountered. And she thought, deliberate means he knew what he was looking for. She thought deliberate means the choosing was not accidental. She thought deliberate means he looked at something and thought this, and then he acted on it. And acting on it took 6 months, and a debt resolution mechanism, and 7 words on a Friday morning. She thought, that is the most elaborate thing anyone has ever done in my direction. She thought, I don't know what to do with that yet. She thought, I'm going to need to know soon. She went to chapter 3, and she worked for 4 hours, and the chapter was good, and she thought, I'll figure out the other thing when the chapter is done. The chapter is what's due first. Constance invited Nora to tea on a Thursday afternoon at 2, communicated through a handwritten note left on the kitchen counter, because Constance operated in the vocabulary of a woman who understood that the format of an invitation communicated its own information. The note said, tea Thursday at 2. In the sitting room adjacent to the library. Comelon. Nora read it twice. She thought, this is either the most important conversation of the arrangement or the end of it. The sitting room had the quality of a space that had been composed rather than decorated, each element positioned with the understanding that a room was a set of relationships between objects, not a collection of objects in a space. Tea already made on the low table, privacy already arranged. Nora sat in the chair across from Constance. She waited. Tell me about your family, Constance said. Nora had expected many possible opening questions, and this was not one of them. What would you like to know? Where they're from, what they do, whether they understand what you're doing. My family is from Rockford. My mother works in a school cafeteria, and my father drives for a trucking company when his back allows it. I have 2 brothers, both in trades. Nobody in my family has a graduate degree. Does that make your work harder or easier? Both. Harder, because there's no framework for it in my immediate environment. Easier, because I don't have the imposter syndrome that comes from being surrounded by people who have already done what you're trying to do. You compare yourself to the work instead. Yes. What does your mother think about the work? She doesn't understand the specifics. But she understands that I'm studying something that matters. She reads about corporate wage gaps in the news and she says, "Is that what you're writing about?" And I say, "More or less." And she says, "Good. Someone should." Constance's expression was careful, which Nora had learned meant she was receiving information and processing it rather than formulating a response. "What does your dissertation say about companies like ours?" It says that the structural mechanisms that allow family-held corporations to maintain generational wealth are, in many cases, the same structural mechanisms that limit economic mobility for the workforce outside the family. It's not a moral argument. It's a description of how the systems interact. Most people who hold that position make it moral. Most people who hold that position haven't done the structural analysis. When you do the analysis, the moral conclusions are implied by the evidence. You don't need to add them. Constance looked at her for a moment. How much of the dissertation is about Rhys Holdings specifically? One chapter uses it as a primary case study. 2 others reference it in comparative analysis. What does the chapter say? It says that the governance structure of Rhys Holdings has, over 3 generations, created strong alignment between family interests and board decision-making, which has protected the company through economic volatility, but has also consistently resulted in compensation and mobility outcomes for non-family employees that fall below comparable industry benchmarks. She paused. It also notes that the current CEO has taken 2 significant steps in the past 18 months that suggest awareness of the issue. Constance was very quiet. Which 2 steps? Nora told her. Both were in public, reporting a revised equity participation program and a changed hiring protocol for senior positions. Those were his decisions, Constance said. Not board decisions. I know. That's in the chapter. The chapter notes them as coming from internal rather than structural reform pressure. He did them because he thought they were right. Yes, that's also in the chapter. The chapter notes that individual ethical decisions within structures are important but insufficient for systemic change. Constance set down her tea. You're going to publish this? When I defend it successfully? Yes. And being here in this arrangement, in this house, doesn't create a conflict. I was concerned about it. The arrangement happened before I had time to be strategically cautious about it. Is that how you're explaining it to yourself? That's the accurate explanation. All right. She picked up the tea again. Tell me something I won't find in the dissertation. Nora thought about it. Your grandson is trying to be better than the structure he inherited. He's not quite there yet, but he's working in the right direction. How would you know? I've been watching him work for 3 weeks. And because 2 weeks ago he said something on a phone call that cost him a short-term advantage to say, what did he say? I'd rather not repeat it, but he said it. Constance looked at her. Are you in love with my grandson? No. She said it with the precision of someone who had checked the answer before giving it and found it accurate. Accurate as of this moment, which was the only accuracy available. You said that very carefully. I said it accurately. Yes, those are different things. Constance stood. The dissertation will be good. I hope I'm alive to read the published version. At the door. She turned back. He's been different since you came. I don't expect you to do anything about that observation. I'm making it for the record. She left. Nora sat in the small room with the tea going cold and thought about for the record and about the 2 things that were different, careful and accurate, and thought that Constance Rhys was the sharpest person she'd sat across from in a long time, and that Constance had let her see that deliberately, which was its own kind of gift. She stayed in the sitting room for 20 minutes after Constance left. She sat because the room waited well, and because she was being honest about the fact that the conversation had moved something she'd been keeping carefully in place. She thought about the dissertation and about the chapter and about the 2 steps she'd described to Constance as potential indicators of structural change. And she thought about the phone call she hadn't meant to hear. And she thought about honesty that costs something. She thought, I am not in love with Calder Rhys. And then she thought, I am not in love with Calder Rhys yet. And then she thought, that's a different sentence, and I need to be honest about that difference. She picked up the tea. She drank it cold. She went home. The week that followed had the quality of the weeks before a decision already made, but not yet acted on, everything heightened. Each conversation slightly more loaded. She worked on the dissertation, which was in its final stages. She thought about the difference between careful and accurate all week. She thought about it when she ran into her dissertation advisor, Dr. Meta, at the university library, who said she looked well and asked about the final chapter. Nora said it was progressing. She went back to the library and wrote the positionality note, disclosing her proximity to a primary case study subject during the final chapter. She was very honest in it. She thought that honesty in academic writing was easier than honesty in the other places. Because in academic writing, the honesty was about the work. She thought, I should find a citation format for the other places. She went home. She did not mention this particular thought to Jin. On Friday, the day before the Hartwell dinner, a text from Calder Marcus will be at the dinner. He asked specifically to be included. The Hartwells agreed before I could find a reason to object. Then, after a pause, visible in the timestamps I wanted you to know, she looked at the text, Marcus at the Hartwell dinner. He would use what he knew there, because the dinner was the closing event, and whatever disruption he wanted to cause had maximum effect at the moment of closing. She thought about the arrangement, and the 6 weeks, and the $12,000, and the dissertation chapter, and Constance saying he's been different since. You came. And the phone call, and the terms she had set on that Friday morning in October, which now felt as though they had been set by a version of herself that had underestimated the situation in a specific and important way. She thought about what Calder had said on the phone to Marcus, not what he'd said to her, but what he'd said when she hadn't been meant to hear it. She thought, I'm going to the Hartwell dinner, and I'm going to tell the truth if it comes up, and I'm going to let whatever happens happen. She texted back, I know, I'll be ready. She set the phone down. She thought about what to wear to the Hartwell dinner, and then thought about the fact that she was thinking about what to wear. And then, thought Jin cannot find out about this. She would, but not yet. She called her advisor the following morning. 2 questions she'd been holding for a week. First, positionality disclosure in fieldwork adjacent research. Dr. Meta said yes, without qualification. Document and disclose. Nora had already written the note. Second question. Could a dissertation critically analyzing a specific company be published if the researcher had, in the course of completing the research, developed a personal connection to someone associated with the company? Define personal connection. Dr. Meta said, ongoing. If there's an ongoing relationship that might be perceived to have influenced the analysis, be transparent about it in the acknowledgements and disclosure sections when you publish. Pause. Nora, are you all right? Yes. I'm doing good work. I know you are. I also know you have a tendency to run every personal variable through an academic framework when you're trying to manage it. Is that a problem? It's a feature and a limitation. Make sure you're not missing something by staying in the analytical frame. She hung up. Nora thought about features and limitations and about what Dr. Meta had said, and she thought, I know what I'm not saying out loud. I have been not saying it carefully for about a week. She thought, Jin has already said it out loud for me, and I told her she was wrong. She put her phone in her bag. She got dressed for the Hartwell dinner. The dress was new, $200 of the $12,000. The first money she'd spent from the arrangement on something that wasn't rent or tuition or food. She thought about what that meant for approximately 4 minutes, and then stopped. It was dark blue and had the quality of the authority dress, but with more specific intention behind it. She put on the earrings her mother had never asked for back. She went to the Rhys mansion. Calder was at the door, in the board meeting suit, and he looked at her the way he'd been looking at her for 3 weeks, with the expression she couldn't categorize. And he started to say something, and then didn't. "We need to leave," she said. "Yes." On the drive, she said, "Tell me what Marcus gets out of disrupting this dinner. He's been trying to position himself as a majority stakeholder in the Hartwell subsidiary acquisition for 8 months. If this deal closes through a version he wasn't part of structuring, his position is weakened. And using my research as leverage accomplishes, which creates a credibility question about my judgment. If I've been bringing a researcher who's been studying the company's weaknesses into my domestic circle without disclosing it, the Hartwells might conclude that my judgment is questionable in ways that matter for a long-term partnership." She looked at the road ahead. "What did you tell the Hartwells about me when you introduced me? What you told me to tell them? Graduate program, academic background, private person, all accurate. Yes. Then, tonight, I'm going to make it complete." He looked at her. "Someone showed me this week that honesty that costs something is worth more than a comfortable story. I'm going to try that approach. My grandmother, among others, you don't have to," he said. "I know. I want to." She watched the city for a moment. "Tell me one more thing about Marcus that I should know before we go in." He told her. She filed it. The car reached the venue. They went in. The Hartwell closing dinner was at a restaurant she'd read about in a hospitality magazine in a dentist's waiting room. She registered the room and then set it aside, because the room was not the point tonight. She scanned the table, Evan Hartwell and Clara, already in a conversation with the easy quality of 2 people who had been married long enough to be in the middle of something without anyone needing to know what. 2 men from Hartwell's legal team, and Marcus Weld at the far end. Positioned adjacent to, but not directly across from anyone, from the Rhys side, by the seat of someone who wanted to be in the room without being in the primary sightline. She sat down, picked up the menu without opening it. "Clara, I've been following the environmental litigation you referenced at lunch. The ruling last week." Clara turned toward her with the immediate engagement of someone who did not often encounter their professional domain at these kinds of dinners. And the table began. Marcus waited until the main course. She had expected this. The conversation had settled into a comfortable register, and Calder was mid-sentence about the acquisition timeline when Marcus said, with the smoothness of someone who had rehearsed the entrance, "Nora, I've been meaning to ask. I understand you're doing research on family-held corporate structures. I believe Rhys Holdings is one of your case studies." The table decelerated slightly. She looked at Marcus across the table. "Yes. It's one of several case studies in the dissertation. Same register as everything else she'd said at the table. The research focuses on structural patterns in multi-generational family corporations' compensation structures, governance, architecture, mobility outcomes for non-family employees. Rhys Holdings is a well-documented example with strong public data and a recent history of internal reform initiatives that make it interesting from a comparative standpoint." She paused. "I should have mentioned it earlier in our acquaintance. Evan, I'm sorry I didn't. Academic research life and this context don't naturally suggest themselves as connected, and I was waiting for the right moment, which this apparently is." She looked at Clara when she said the last part. Clara's expression was the expression of a woman who recognized a situation being managed gracefully and who appreciated the management. Evan said, "What kind of reform initiatives?" Nora told him concisely and accurately. "The 2 that were documented in the chapter. Those are Calder's decisions," Evan said. "Yes, which is part of what makes the company interesting to study the relationship between individual decision-making and structural persistence." Marcus was very quiet. She didn't look at him directly. "To the table generally, I should say. The research is structural analysis, not editorial opinion. The data does what the data does. Evan looked at Calder. You knew about this. I knew about the research area before tonight. I didn't know about the specific case study chapter until recently. He said it without deflection. I'd recommend reading the work when it's published. The analysis is accurate. I don't always agree with the framing. But accurate and agreeable aren't the same thing. And I'd rather know what the structure actually looks like than have a comfortable picture of it. The table absorbed this, Clara said. To Nora. When does it go to defense? 6 weeks. Let us know when the published version is available. I'd like to read it. The dinner continued. Marcus said nothing further that touched the dissertation. She watched him recalculate throughout the meal without appearing to watch him. And she thought. He brought a lever to a room where the lever had already been named and placed on the table. And it's not a lever anymore. That's what happens when you disclose on your own terms. The contract was signed after dessert. Evan Hartwell shook Calder's hand and said something about the next phase of the partnership. And the legal people from both sides had the brief conversation of people confirming work that was already done. Clara touched Nora's arm as they were leaving and said, quietly, "That was well handled. It needed to be said. It needed to be said the way you said it. There's a difference." She squeezed Nora's arm and went to find her husband. Nora stood for a moment in the restaurant that she had recognized from a magazine profile and that she had walked into for the first time tonight, and that had been, she thought, the first room in this entire arrangement where she had not been managing a performance but simply being what she was, outside the restaurant. Before they got in the car, she said, "Before we go, the terms of the arrangement are complete. The contract is signed. I'm going to go to my apartment tonight and work on the dissertation, and everything we agreed to is prime." She stopped. "Everything we agreed to is done. But I want you to know that the arrangement was the smallest part of the 6 weeks." He was looking at her. She said, "I don't know what to do with that as a sentence. I just wanted to say it." "All right," he said. "Okay." She got in the car. He got in the car. They drove back to the mansion, and neither of them said anything. And when the car stopped, she said, "Good night." And he said, "Good night, Nora." And she went to the transit stop. She went home. She sat at the kitchen table with her tea and thought, "I know what I'm paying, and what I'm paying it for." She finished her tea. She opened the laptop. She wrote the last 3 pages of chapter 4. They were very good. She went to sleep. She wrote the positionality note at the university library on a Wednesday, which was the day she'd blocked in her calendar for revisions to the methodology chapter. She had been thinking about it for 4 days, the specific language of academic disclosure, which required honesty without defensiveness, precision without self-flagellation. Dr. Mehta's comment about features and limitations had stayed with her. The observation that she ran personal variables through an academic framework when she was trying to manage them. She thought the positionality note is an academic framework for a personal variable. I wonder if Dr. Mehta was warning me about exactly this. She wrote it anyway. It was very good. She saved it and sat at the library desk for a moment and thought, I can write honestly about being in proximity to my research subject. I can write that the proximity may have affected the analysis in ways I've accounted for and disclosed. What I cannot write in the positionality note is the part where the proximity has affected me in ways that are not the analysis. She thought that part goes somewhere else. She didn't know yet where. Friday evening, the week before the Hartwell dinner, she was in the east alcove when Calder came to the library for the first time voluntarily not to find a book. Not arriving by accident, but walking to the door and opening it with the specific quality of someone who has made a decision and is executing it. He came in and pulled the chair from the corner to the edge of her desk and sat in it. I've been reading the public filings, he said. She looked up from the laptop. Which ones? All of them. From the last 8 years. He looked at the desk surface. The sustainability section reads the way you described it in the car. It was written by a legal department trying to avoid liability. She closed the laptop. Yes. I wrote the current version 3 years ago with the legal team. I was trying to establish a baseline for reporting rather than make actual claims about our practices. That comes through. I know. I can see it now. He looked at the bookshelves. The compensation differential in the latest annual report, the gap between senior leadership and median employee compensation. What about it? It's wider than comparable companies in our sector. I've been aware of it. I haven't known what to do about it in a way that addresses the structure rather than the symptom. She looked at him. He was looking at the shelves, not at her, and his expression was the one she'd been learning to read, not the ledger calculation, not the management. The one that appeared when he was thinking about something he was genuinely uncertain about and hadn't organized yet. She thought this is the conversation that belongs in the chapter. She thought this is also the conversation that has nothing to do with the chapter. She thought I need to be careful about conflating those two things. And I am going to be careful. And I am going to say what is useful rather than what is interesting. Because useful and interesting are not always the same thing, and right now, useful is what's required. The compensation structure in most family-held corporations reflects a set of decisions made when the company was smaller and when those decisions were justifiable by the risk the founding family was taking. She said, the structure persists after the risk profile has changed because the governance model doesn't have a mechanism for questioning its own historical logic. The question isn't what number to change the differential to. The question is, what decision-making process produced the current differential, and whether that process is still appropriate for the current size and scope of the company. He looked at her. She looked back. That's in the dissertation. He said, yes. Can I read it? She hadn't expected that. She had been operating on the assumption that the dissertation would be published. He would read it, and she would have been clear of the situation by then. She looked at the laptop. She thought about what it meant to hand someone the extended analysis of their own company's structural problems and ask them to read it. She thought about whether she was ready for whatever conversation would follow the reading. She thought probably not. She thought, but the conversation is going to happen eventually, and probably sooner is better than later. After the Hartwell dinner, she said, if the contract closes as expected, I'll send you the chapter. Not the whole dissertation, one thing at a time. He nodded. He stood. At the door. He turned back. The financial filing I was citing at the dinner when you caught the number I checked it after, against the year-end total. You were right. I know. I've cited that number in 3 presentations. Nobody else caught it. Nobody else had read that year-end total recently, and was paying attention to the right thing at the right time. You were paying attention to my numbers in a meeting you were attending as a social presence. I pay attention to numbers everywhere. It's not voluntary. He looked at her for a moment. I used to be the most prepared person in every room I walked into. He said, I know. That's an adjustment. She almost said something kind. She didn't. Because kind wasn't what was true. What was true was, you'll adjust. He left. She opened the laptop. She sat for a moment before she started working. Because the conversation she had just had was the conversation that belonged in both the chapter and in the other place. And she was going to need to be clearer about the line between those two things before she could concentrate. And getting clear took what it took. She got clear. She worked. The week before the Hartwell dinner, she worked at the university library every afternoon because she had made the decision that the East Alcove desk was now operating as a variable rather than a tool. And tools needed to be distinguishable from variables in order to be used correctly. The university library was neutral. The desk in the East Alcove was not neutral anymore. She worked at the university library, and the chapter got done, and she submitted it to Dr. Mehta, and she thought, this chapter is good because I understand what I'm writing about from the inside. And I understand it from the inside because of a set of choices I made over the last 4 weeks. And the choices were, she thought about whether the word good was accurate, and she thought it was not entirely accurate, and she thought the choices were right. The choices were the right choices for the work, and the right choices for me, and I am not going to pretend that a choice can only be justified by one of those criteria. It needed to justify both. It does. She submitted the chapter, and she went home on the train, and she wrote the positionality note on her phone. On the train, because she was on public transit, and nobody was going to read it over her shoulder on a northbound Brown line at 4 in the afternoon. She wrote it in one draft. It was good. She saved it. Jin was home when she got in. Jin looked up from the casebook, looked at her face, and said, Chapter 4. Submitted. The positionality note. Written. And. Nora sat down on the kitchen floor with her bag still on her shoulder. Jin waited. I wrote in the positionality note that my proximity to the primary case study subject may have influenced my capacity to access organizational culture data that would not have been available through external analysis alone. She said, That's the academic version. Yes. What's the other version? She thought about this. The other version is that I've been in a situation for 4 weeks where I've had to actually look at the thing I've been studying at arm's length for 3 years. And I've found that the arm's length was producing accurate analysis, and the close-up is producing different analysis. And the different analysis is better. And the reason it's better is not only proximity to data, but proximity to a specific person. And that person is... She stopped. Jin waited. That person is, she said, and stopped again, and looked at the kitchen floor, and thought, I know how that sentence ends. I have known for approximately 9 days. I have been not finishing it for 9 days because finishing it changes the parameters of the situation in ways I haven't fully mapped yet. She thought, stop mapping. That person is someone I don't want to be at arm's length from anymore, she said. Academically or otherwise. Jin looked at her for a long moment. Okay, she said. Okay, yes. Okay. She went back to the casebook. Now tell me what you're going to do about it. I'm going to finish the dissertation and submit it and go to the Hartwell dinner and say what I need to say. In that order. Necessarily, in that order. The dissertation was always the first thing. Right. Jin turned a page. Nora. Yes. For what it's worth, the positionality note sounds good. Both versions. Nora sat on the kitchen floor for another minute. She thought yes. Both versions. She stood up. She went to her room. She opened the laptop. She looked at the positionality note. She thought this is accurate. She thought. And the other version is also accurate. She thought I am going to be a very good academic because I know how to tell the difference between the two. And I am also going to be a very present person in my own life because I know that telling the difference does not mean choosing between them. She thought both. She closed the laptop. She went to sleep. What happened the day after the Hartwell dinner was not the thing she expected. A phone call at 9 in the morning from a number she didn't recognize. Aldrich. Calder's housekeeper, asking if she was available to come by that morning. She arrived at 11 and found Calder in the kitchen, which was her room in some sense that she had developed over 2 years of knowing it, and she thought he had chosen it for that reason. He was making coffee. Sit down, he said. I'll stand. What happened? Marcus Weld filed a complaint with the Hartwell board this morning. He's claiming the closing was influenced by undisclosed material relationships, specifically that my partner has a financial research interest in the acquisition target's primary partner, meaning Rhys Holdings. She processed this. It's technically a frame that could create a procedural delay. It's not a sound legal complaint, but it will require a response, And time is what benefits Marcus. What does he want to be bought out of the subsidiary position at an above-market valuation? He's been trying to engineer that for 8 months. The complaint is leverage. She sat down. She had been the one who said stand, and it turned out stand was wrong. And if the complaint is resolved without meeting his valuation, then the delay is a cost we absorb, and the contract closes eventually. He poured 2 cups and set one in front of her. What does the complaint say specifically about my research? That the primary researcher studying the company's structural inequities was simultaneously presenting as the personal partner of the company's CEO during the negotiation period, and that this relationship was not disclosed to the negotiating parties. I disclosed it at the dinner. You disclosed it at the dinner where the contract was being signed, not during the preceding negotiation period. He looked at her. I want to be clear about something. The complaint is Marcus's responsibility. What he's doing is tactical. He doesn't have a principled position here. But the question it raises, whether the arrangement created a situation where things should have been disclosed earlier, is one I should have asked at the beginning and didn't. I should have disclosed it myself. You offered me accurate information when I asked for it. I didn't ask the right questions early enough. He was quiet for a moment. We're agreeing that we both handled the information imperfectly. Yes, that's not very useful right now. He almost smiled. She could see it. What is useful? The Hartwells know about the research. They asked for a copy of the dissertation when it's published, which suggests they're not concerned about it. Clara Hartwell called my office this morning and said, quoting, "Your girlfriend's research sounds valuable. Don't let Marcus's noise become your noise." Clara Hartwell called your office. Yes. She thought about Clara at the first lunch, with the impact litigation background and the quality of someone who had spent a career being right in rooms that didn't initially want to hear it. What do you need from me? Nothing you haven't already given. The disclosure happened. The Hartwells are not the problem. Marcus is. Marcus is something I can manage. I've known his pressure points for longer than he knows I have. He looked at her. Is there a conflict of interest in what I'm about to do about Marcus? What are you about to do? He told her. Completely, and without the management she'd watched him apply to other rooms. She listened. That's enough to remove him from the subsidiary position entirely if you want it. I know. Is that what you want? I want him to stop. Whether that requires total removal or a negotiated exit is a tactical question I can make from a position of strength now that the complaint is on record, including the phone call I had with him about your research, which my assistant notes on all calls of that nature. She looked at him. You were building a record. I was protecting a position. My position. Both of ours. The situation had enough ambiguity that I wanted a clear record of what I knew when. A beat. What happens now with the arrangement? The 6 weeks are done. The contract is closing. He was looking at her. And the rest? What rest? She looked at him. He looked at her. I said something last night in front of the restaurant, that the arrangement was the smallest part of the 6 weeks. I remember. I'm going to need you to respond to that at some point. I know. Not right now. You have a complaint to respond to. Yes. But when you've responded to the complaint. Yes. All right. She stood. I'll be in touch. She went to the door. Nora. She stopped. Thank you. For last night. She said. You don't need to thank me for telling the truth. He said. I'm thanking you for something bigger than last night. She turned and looked at him across the kitchen. Then you're welcome. For the thing bigger than last night. She left. The Marcus Weld situation resolved in 48 hours. She heard from Calder in a text on the second evening, complaint withdrawn. Buyout at the original valuation. Contract proceeds. Then, you should know that Evan Hartwell specifically requested you be at the closing event. Clara seconded it. I said I would ask. She read the text twice. When is it? He told her. She thought about the 6 weeks being done and about what was and wasn't still active. And she thought that attending the closing event for a contract she had helped save was something she wanted to do, regardless of what category it fell into. She texted, "I'll be there. No compensation needed." He said, "I know." Then, after a pause, "Thank you." She put the phone down. She thought about no compensation needed the first time in the arrangement. She described something she was doing without placing it in the economic frame. That was information about something. She thought, "I know what it's information about." She opened the laptop. She wrote 7 pages. They were very good. She called her mother that night. Her mother asked about the dissertation. Nora said it was almost done. Her mother said she had been reading about corporate pay gaps in the news. "Is that what your dissertation is about?" "More or less." "Good. Someone should." Pause. "You sound different." "Different? How?" "Like something happened that you're not telling me about. But that's not bad. Something happened that I'm processing." "Okay. You'll tell me when you know what to say." "Yes." "Is it a person, Mom?" "I'm just asking." "It might be. I'll tell you when I know." "Okay. Eat something. Call me next week." She hung up. Nora sat at the kitchen table and thought about the "you sound different" and the "something happened." And she thought, "My mother can tell from a phone call." She thought that is either very good or very concerning. She thought, probably both simultaneously, which seems to be the correct frame for most of what is happening right now. She submitted Chapter 4 to Dr. Mehta 2 days before the closing event. "Dr. Mehta responded within a day. "This is the best chapter in the dissertation. The positionality note is exactly what it should be. Specific. Honest. Not defensive. Schedule the final review before the defense." She forwarded the email to Jin. Jin replied with 3 fire emojis, and Nora. Nora replied, "I know." Jin replied, "What are you going to do about it?" Nora replied, "Finish the dissertation first." Jin replied, "And then?" Nora replied, "Then I'll figure out what comes after." Jin replied, "You've known what comes after for about 2 weeks, and you're just building up to saying it." Nora put the phone down. She thought, Jin is not wrong. She picked up the phone. She texted Jin, "Fine. You're right." Jin replied, "I know I am. Go to the closing event." Nora replied, "I'm going." Jin replied, "And after?" Nora replied, "I know." She put the phone down. She thought not yet is becoming now. She thought I need to find the right words for it. She opened the laptop. She looked at Chapter 4. She thought about the positionality note that she had written honestly. And she thought I need to write the personal version of the positionality note. She knew what it said. She would know when to say it. The closing event was at the Rhys mansion in the house she had been working in for 2 years. In the rooms she knew. She arrived with time to see that the Hartwells had brought 3 people she hadn't met. And that Constance was there, which she hadn't known. She said hello to people. She talked to Clara about the litigation case. She talked to Evan about the acquisition timeline. She talked to one of the 3 new people, who turned out to be the Hartwell family's archivist, and who had the quality of someone whose entire professional life had been organized around the preservation of accurate records, and who was, therefore, the most immediately compatible person she'd met at any of these events. At some point in the 2nd hour, Constance found her near the library door. "How is the dissertation?" "Chapter 4 is done. The final chapter is half written. Defense is scheduled. I heard about Marcus Weld's complaint. It was resolved." "I heard about that too." Constance looked at her. "You could have disclosed it earlier." "Yes." "Why didn't you?" "Because when I entered the arrangement, I was treating it as a transaction with defined terms, and disclosing the research would have introduced a variable I wasn't sure I could control. I was wrong about the frame. A transaction is not the right frame for something that changes as it proceeds. Most people don't revise their frame mid-process. Itrito. It's expensive to hold the wrong frame when the data doesn't fit it. Constance looked at the library door. He's in there. If you're wondering, I wasn't wondering. Constance looked at her. Now you are. She walked away. Nora stood at the library door for a moment. She thought, I know what I need to say, and this is when I need to say it. She opened the door and went in. He was at the economics shelf. He had a book in his hand, but wasn't reading it. He turned when she came in, and they were in the library in the same configuration as the day she had turned the dissertation pages face down on the desk. And she thought that was 3 weeks ago, and it's a different room now. Constance said you were in here. She said, I needed 5 minutes. I need fewer than 5. He looked at her. The arrangement is done. The contract closed. I've been paid. Those are the terms I set, and they're satisfied. He waited. But I told you last night that the arrangement was the smallest part of the 6 weeks. I want to say the larger part out loud. I've been very careful about the timing of this, and I think the timing is now. All right. I came into this as a transaction. I set terms, and I evaluated the situation in terms, and I was correct that the terms I set were fair. What I didn't account for was that I am apparently the kind of person who gets genuinely invested in a situation and cannot maintain full analytical distance from it, and that what I've been calling analytical distance for the past 2 weeks was the specific version of careful that is actually a way of managing something you know is true, but aren't ready to say yet. What's the true thing? I'm in love with you. She said it with the directness she brought to things she had verified before she said them, and she held his look without performance, without softening, just the fact itself and the willingness to let it be received. He looked at her. That's the most efficiently I've ever been told something significant. I've been holding it for 2 weeks. It wanted to come out efficiently. 2 weeks. Approximately. The specific onset is harder to date than I expected, which is interesting from a data perspective. You're doing analysis on your own feelings. I do analysis on everything. It's a feature and a limitation. My advisor told me that. She looked at him steadily. What does the analysis say? That the feeling is genuine, that it developed in the course of a situation I designed the parameters of, and that exceeded those parameters, and that I would like to know if you have anything to say in response. He was quiet for a moment. She waited. The thing I've been trying to say since the Friday morning you handed me terms in my own kitchen. He said, I have been. I've looked at a lot of people in a lot of rooms for 35 years. I am very good at knowing what a person is in approximately 45 seconds. The morning you handed me those terms was the first time I couldn't categorize someone, and I've been trying to categorize you for 6 weeks, and I can't. And at some point in the 3rd week, I understood that the reason I couldn't was because the category would have to be built from scratch, and that the category, if I built it, would be called the person I want in every room I'm going to be in for the rest of my life. She looked at him. She thought about the 7 words on the Friday morning, and the 40-minute window, and the terms she had set, and everything that had happened since. And she thought, yes, this is the thing that was larger than the arrangement. That's a very efficient way of saying something significant. I've been holding it for 3 weeks. It wanted to come out efficiently. She almost laughed. She did. Actually, a small, real laugh that arrived before she could manage it, which was the specific quality of things that arrived when the management was finally off. He looked at her with the expression she could now name, which was the face of someone who was exactly where they wanted to be. She thought, I think I have that too. The library held them in the quiet it had always had. We should go back out there, he said. We should. Neither of them moved immediately. I have a question. Yes. What are the terms now? He looked at her. What terms would you like? None. I'm done with terms. Good. That doesn't mean I'm not going to have opinions about things. I know. She went to the library door. Calder. Yes. The first morning. In the kitchen. The 7 words. Yes. Best thing you ever said. He looked at her. She saw the expression, the face of someone who was exactly where they wanted to be. Come on, she said. The Hartwells are out there. She opened the door. He followed her out. She was back in Minneapolis by Monday, in the apartment that was hers for another 6 months, and that she had furnished with the specific efficiency of someone who knew they were going to be somewhere for a defined period. Good desk. Good light. The academic library, 3 blocks away. She worked well there. She thought about Chicago in the evenings, and she called Calder most evenings. And the calls had the rhythm of calls between 2 people who had figured out how to be present with each other through a medium that wasn't presence. He told her about the board meeting where the compensation proposal had been presented. She had sent him her notes the week before, 4 pages of analytical annotation, identifying where the proposal addressed structural causes and where it was treating symptoms, suggesting 2 revisions that would make the first phase more likely to hold in the second. He had incorporated both revisions without mentioning that he had done so until the call after the meeting. The board approved the pilot. He said, "Which 3 divisions?" he told her. She thought about the data in the chapter, the specific differential numbers by division, and thought, yes, those are the right 3. The 2 revisions held up in the room. They held up in the room. She looked at the Minneapolis evening going dark outside the apartment window. She thought about the desk in the east alcove, and the cleaned windowsills, and the economics books that had been handled and replaced slightly off-angle. And she thought about all the ways she had been watching this company and this person for months, and the ways those 2 things had become impossible to separate. Good, she said. That's what the data suggested they'd do. Your data. My analysis. The data is public. Nora. Yes, you understand what you've done here. She thought about this carefully. I've written an accurate analysis of a structural problem in a company I was studying. The company is using the analysis to address the problem. That's the purpose of the analysis. And if I'd read the analysis and used it as evidence that the structure was fine, she looked at the ceiling. Then I would have published the analysis, and the data would have been available for other people to draw different conclusions from. Pause. That's a very clean answer. It's the accurate one. It doesn't account for what you wanted. She thought about what she wanted. She thought about it with the full analytical attention she brought to things that warranted it, which was everything, but which this warranted in a particular way. She thought, I wanted the analysis to be good and accurate, and I wanted it to matter, and I wanted the person I had been watching for months to look at what he was running and see it clearly. She thought I wanted him to see clearly. That was the thing underneath all of it. I wanted the analysis to be useful. She said, It was. That's still a clean answer. I know. A beat. The East Garden. You mentioned you'd think about it. I've thought about it. And I'm going to finish it. In the spring. I want you to be there when it's done. She looked at the ceiling of the Minneapolis apartment and thought about spring and about an East Garden designed by someone who was gone and about what it meant to finish something that had been started in a different chapter of a life. I'll be in Chicago in April, she said. I know. Spring, she said. Spring, he said. They said goodnight. She put the phone down. She looked at the ceiling for a moment longer, and then she opened the laptop and she worked on the second article. And the second article was going to be very good, and she was going to get her name on it in a journal that people in her field read, and she was going to be Dr. Fenn with a faculty position and a research program, and all of that was exactly what she had been building toward, and it was also not the whole picture anymore, which she thought was probably the correct state of affairs for anyone who had been paying attention to the right things. She submitted Chapter 4 to Dr. Meta 2 days before the closing event. The response came within 24 hours. This is the best chapter in the dissertation. The positionality note is exactly what it should be. Schedule the final review before the defense. She forwarded it to Jin without comment. Jin replied, Nora. Nora replied, I know. They had both known this was coming for some time. The email from Dr. Mehta was simply the official confirmation of something that was already true. She thought, accurate and true are slightly different things, and the difference is that accurate is what you can verify, and true is what you know before you can verify it. And I have known for approximately 2 weeks what I didn't yet have the verification for, and now I have it. She closed the laptop. She went to the kitchen and made tea and stood at the window of Jin's apartment. She was staying there for the week, the night before the closing event, and looked at the Chicago street below, which was doing what Chicago streets did in November, which was everything at once, and none of it slowly. She thought, I know what I'm going to do after the closing event. She thought I've known for 2 weeks. She thought, tomorrow, I'm going to do it. She didn't sleep very well that night. Not from anxiety, but from the specific restlessness of someone who has made a decision and is waiting for the clock to reach the time to execute it. Jin knocked on her door at 7. Coffee's made. Nora came out. They sat at the kitchen table. Jin with her casebook. Nora with the laptop open, but not working. They drank coffee in the comfortable silence of 2 people who had been through enough together that silence was allowed to contain whatever it contained. I'm going to tell him tonight, Nora said. I know, Jin said, without looking up from the casebook. I've been thinking about it for 2 weeks. I know. You're not going to say I told you so. I'm saving it. She turned a page. Are you nervous? Nora thought about this. No. I know what I want to say. I've been composing it for 2 weeks. Of course you have. Jin closed the casebook. Nora, you are going to walk into that closing event tonight, and you are going to say the thing you want to say, and he is going to say the thing he has clearly also been wanting to say. And then you are going to come home and tell me everything. That's a very confident prediction. I've been watching you not say this for 2 weeks. I've been watching him not say it for 6. The law of eventually applies here. She picked up the casebook again. Wear the blue dress. Nora was already planning to wear the blue dress. She didn't say this. She finished her coffee. She went to get ready. She submitted the positionality note and the full chapter to Dr. Mehta on a Thursday, and received the response on Friday, which was the morning of the closing event. This is the best chapter in the dissertation. The positionality note is exactly what it should be: specific, honest, not defensive. Schedule the final review before the defense. She read the email twice. She forwarded it to Jin. Jin replied in 30 seconds with 3 fire emojis. Nora replied, I know. Jin replied, tonight. Nora replied, tonight. She called her mother. Her mother picked up on the second ring, which was unusual for a Friday morning, and said, I was wondering when you'd call. I read the news story about that corporate wage gap report. Was it accurate? Mostly. They made it simpler than it is. You'd say that. I would. How's the dissertation? Chapter 4 is done. Dr. Mehta says it's the best chapter. A pause. Of course it is, her mother said, with the specific certainty of someone who had been saying, of course it is for 27 years, and who had consistently been right. And how's everything else? She thought about everything else. She thought about tonight. She thought about the closing event and the library and the thing she had been building towards saying for 2 weeks. She thought about the man who had read Chapter 7 of the paper collection on corporate governance, and about Constance saying he's been different, and about the desk in the east alcove with the better Wi-Fi signal, and about the winter light in the economics section of a library reorganized by a 14-year-old. Everything else is good. Mom, she said. Everything else is going the right direction. Okay, her mother said. Eat something today. Big evenings go better when you've eaten. She had no idea about the big evening. Nora thought about telling her and thought not yet. Okay, she said. I will. She hung up. She made toast. She ate it. She opened the laptop and worked on the final chapter for 3 hours with the specific focus of someone who knows they are working their last hours on something before a line gets crossed. And the work was good, and the focus held. And at 3 o'clock, she closed the laptop and got dressed and went to the Rhys mansion for the closing event. And she thought, walking up to the door, I know what I'm doing tonight, and I know why, and I am not afraid of it. I am very good at looking at things clearly, and the clearest thing I've looked at in 4 weeks is this. She knocked. Aldrich opened the door. She went in. The closing event had its own momentum from the first hour. The Hartwells and their people and the Rhys people and Constance and the particular energy of a room where something significant was being completed. She moved through it with the attention she brought to every room these days, which was the attention that registered everything and that had stopped requiring effort to sustain, which she thought was a sign that the attention had become structural rather than tactical. She thought what was happening, and who was talking to whom, and what the energy in the room was doing. And she stored it, and she found herself in conversation with the Hartwell archivist for 40 minutes about the preservation of corporate records, and whether digital preservation created different kinds of institutional memory than physical records had, which was a conversation she found genuinely interesting and which connected to something she was thinking about for the second article. And she thought, this is what it looks like when a room stops being work and starts being life. She thought, I have been in rooms this way before, in seminar rooms at the university, and I have not been in rooms this way anywhere else. She thought, I want to be in rooms this way. She thought, I already am. Constance found her near the end of the first hour, and they talked for 20 minutes. The same kind of conversation as before. Constance saying the true thing, in the way she always said. The true things, which was directly and without performing the directness. He's been different. Don't waste it. She said both of those things again in slightly different words, and Nora heard them both in the slightly different words and thought, I know. She looked at the library door. She thought, he's in there. She thought, I know what I need to say, and this is when I need to say it. She thought. On the train home from the closing event, the late train, the one that moved through the city with the specific quality of a city at 10 in the evening that was neither the urgency of earlier in the night, nor the quiet of the middle of the night, but something in between, transitional and a little suspended. She thought about the library, not what had been said in it. She had already thought about what had been said in it more than once on the walk to the transit stop, and would think about it many more times. She thought about the room itself. She thought about a 14-year-old reorganizing the shelves, and about a man who had not skipped economics on his own system until recently, and about the specific weight of someone moving faster through their own carefully designed sequence because they had found something they were more interested in. She thought about the desk in the east alcove and the better Wi-Fi signal and the afternoon light. She thought about Chapter 7. She thought about all of these things, and she arranged them in the ledger she kept in her head, the one that wasn't made of numbers, but of people, and what they wanted, and what they were willing to do to get it. And she looked at what the ledger said. The ledger said, this is someone who has been moving in your direction since before you noticed him moving. The ledger said you have been moving in his direction since before you were ready to say so. The ledger said the 6 weeks were the terms for a transaction. What came after the 6 weeks has different terms, and the different terms are better, and you both already know what they are. She thought the ledger is right. It usually is. She thought, I am going to Minneapolis in January, and I am going to do excellent work, and I am going to come back, and I am going to have a faculty position, and I am going to build the research program I have been building toward for 4 years, and all of that is the primary variable, she thought, and the secondary variables are going to resolve correctly. She thought, I trust the ledger on this one. She got off at her stop. She walked to Jin's apartment. She made tea. She sat at the kitchen table, and she looked at the mug, and she thought, 6 weeks. She thought the terms were good. She thought the thing they produced is better than the terms, which is what you want from any well-set terms. And I set them correctly, and I am very good at this, and everything from here is going to be built on those good terms, and that is the right foundation. She finished the tea. She went to her room. She opened the laptop. She looked at the last page of chapter 4, which she had written 3 weeks ago, and which was good. She read the last paragraph. She thought, yes, that's right. She closed the laptop. She went to sleep, and she slept well, which was the sleep of someone who has said a true thing out loud and had it received correctly. And there is no better sleep available to a person than that specific kind. She had one more thought on the train that she wrote into the Notes app on her phone, which was what she used when she had something she needed to put somewhere before it slipped. The best terms are the ones that produce outcomes larger than what they were terms for. The original terms covered the Hartwell contract. What the terms produced included the contract and chapter 4 and the positionality note and the library conversation and the answer to a question she had. I've been running for 4 years about what it felt like to be in the thing you were studying instead of outside it. She looked at the note. She thought, yes, that goes in the second article. She pocketed the phone. She watched the city. The dissertation defense was on a Tuesday in December, 6 weeks after the arrangement had ended, and approximately 5 weeks after she'd stopped thinking of it as having ended, because ending implied a boundary, and the boundary had not been clean. She had finished the final chapter in 10 days, the fastest she'd written anything of that length, which she attributed to understanding a thing from the inside, rather than from outside it, and what that did to your prose. Dr. Mehta's response on submission, this is exceptional work. The committee will agree. Schedule the defense. She told Calder about the defense 2 weeks before it happened, giving him the information and leaving the decision to him. She had not expected him to come, he said, without hesitation. What time? She told him, you don't have to. I know. It's going to be technical. I'll manage. There's a chapter about your company. I read it. She'd sent it to him 10 days before the defense. As agreed. He came back with 2 questions about the methodology, both the right questions, and 1 observation about a term she'd used that she defended, and he received the defense without disputing it, which was the most valuable response she could have gotten from the primary subject of a case study. You're going to be a very interesting first reader when this is published. I'm already the most motivated first reader. She arrived at the department building at 9, 2 hours before the defense, because she was the kind of person who arrived before she was ready to leave. She set up her slides, reviewed her materials, and talked to the departmental administrator about the coffee situation in the building, inadequate, and the best place to get lunch within walking distance, matter of ongoing debate. By 10:30 she was approximately as prepared as she had ever felt for anything. She thought the chapter is good. The framework is sound. Let's go. The committee assembled at 11. Dr. Mehta, 2 other economics faculty, and an outside reader from the sociology department whose work on organizational structure she had cited 11 times. The audience, 7 graduate students, 1 she knew well, and Calder at the back of the room, not in the board meeting suit, in the kind of clothes that communicated he had come to pay attention rather than to be seen paying attention. She caught his eye once, briefly, when she was setting up the slides. He looked at her with the expression she could name now. She looked back with what she thought was the expression of someone who had prepared for something and was not afraid of it. She turned back to the slides and began. The defense lasted 2 hours and 12 minutes. She presented the framework and the case studies and the findings and the implications, and the committee asked the questions she'd expected and 3 she hadn't anticipated, and she said all of them. The outside reader asked about the positionality note, specifically about the decision to disclose approximate relationship to one of the primary case study subjects during the final chapter. Proximity always influences analysis, she said. The question is whether the influence is acknowledged and accounted for. The positionality note is my effort to account for it rather than to deny it. The committee can assess whether I did so adequately. The chapter is stronger for the proximity, the outside reader said. You understand the organizational culture in a way external analysis rarely achieves. Thank you, Dr. Mehta. At the end, this committee is going to find in favor of the dissertation without revisions. You're done. Thank you. The room rearranged itself. People came to congratulate her. The outside reader said her work was going to be important. Dr. Mehta hugged her, briefly, which was unusual and therefore precisely calibrated. The graduate student who had taken qualifiers with her said, Obviously you did it. After several minutes the room had thinned and she turned and Calder was there, having waited without making his waiting visible. Dr. Fenn, he said, not technically, until the paperwork. Close enough. A beat. How much did you understand? More than you expected. I read the dissertation. He looked at her. The chapter about the company is accurate. I know. I'm going to have it distributed to the board. She looked at him. With your permission. As external analysis. Anonymous until you publish. That is going to be a very interesting board meeting. Yes, it is. She thought about the 2 steps she'd documented as potential indicators of structural change. And she thought about a 3rd step, a CEO voluntarily distributing critical analysis of his company's structural inequities to the people responsible for those structures. And she thought, that belongs in a future publication. You can use it, with attribution to be disclosed upon formal publication. Fair. I need coffee. The department building situation is inadequate. I know a place. You always know a place. They walked out of the department building into the December afternoon. She thought 4 years and 2 hours and 12 minutes, and this is what the other side of it looks like. This. The cold and the department building and the person walking beside her who was going to distribute her dissertation to his board and who had read it with the attention of someone who genuinely wanted to know what it said. She thought that is the right other side of it. January was different from October, in the way that months following significant events were different, not better or worse, but altered in register. She had submitted the dissertation to the publication process. She had been offered a postdoctoral fellowship at the university where she had done her master's degree, which was in another city, which was a significant variable in the situation she had not yet fully accounted for. She told Calder about the offer the day she received it. When do you need to decide? 2 weeks. Tell me when you've decided. I'm going to need your opinion before I decide. You're going to get it when you ask for it. I'm asking for it now. Take it. It's in Minneapolis. I know. Take it. What does that mean for? It means we figure it out. It means your career is the primary variable here, and the rest are secondary variables, and we solve for the secondary variables once you've made the primary decision. She looked at him. That's a very efficient position. I've been practicing efficiency. She almost smiled. All right. She took the fellowship. She told Jin that night. Minneapolis. Jin said. Yes. And him, secondary variable. You two are actually the same person. That's concerning. It's not concerning. It's probably why it works. I think you might be right. I know I am. A beat. Nora, are you happy? She thought about the question the way she thought about things that deserved serious thought. I'm in a situation I designed the parameters of, and the situation exceeded those parameters. And I'm in love with someone I didn't expect to be in love with, and my dissertation's best chapter is done, and my defense is scheduled, and my mother says I sound different, and Calder Rhys told me not to waste it. That's a yes. Yes. Good. Go to sleep. You have a final chapter to finish. One evening in mid-January, she was in the library organizing notes for the second article revision when Calder came in not for a book, to find her, which had become its own established category. He sat in the chair across from her. I want to ask you something. Yes. The chapter. The one about the company. The section on compensation structures the data on median wage differential between family and non-family employees. She waited. I've been working on a proposal to the board for a restructured compensation framework. I want you to read it before I present it. You want me to read it? The section of the dissertation on compensation was the most specific analysis of the problem. I want to know if the proposal addresses the structural source of the differential, or if it's addressing a symptom. That's a very specific request. I've been a very specific person my entire life. It's a feature. She held the look for a moment. When is the board meeting? He told her. I can have notes to you by Thursday. Thank you. He made no move to leave. She looked at him. That's not all. No. The Minneapolis position starts in August. That's 7 months. He looked at her notes. I want to go on record as the person who says, I don't want you to be in a different city. And also the person who says that what you do with your career is not a thing I'm in the business of influencing. You've already said both of those. I wanted to say them again now that the 7 months is visible. She looked at her notes. I might be in Chicago for the 2 years after the fellowship. There are positions here. I know. I've seen the listings. You've looked at academic positions in the Chicago economics departments. Secondary variables. Yes. He looked at her. We're going to be fine. I know. 7 months is not a long time when you have work to do. No, it isn't, she said. I'll have the notes to you by Thursday. He stood. Calder. Yes. The East Garden. If you ever want to finish it. He looked at her. Not for any reason other than the original reason it was planned. But if you want to. I'll think about that. Good. She went to the door. Calder. Yes. I'm glad you were at the Heron Market. He looked at her, and she was aware that she was standing in the library that had been reorganized by a 14-year-old boy who was still in architecture at 37. And she thought, this is the thing that was larger than the arrangement, and also larger than the terms of what came after the arrangement. She thought, it's going to keep being larger. Good morning. He said finally the same words that had been on the card the morning after the first night. The words that had replaced whatever had been crossed out. She thought, I know what was crossed out. I've always known. Come on, she said. We have work to do. She went back to the desk. He stayed in the chair. The library held them both in its particular quiet. The quiet of books organized by a system that had been running for 23 years, and that was still, clearly, in progress. She called her mother in February. Weekly update, the first article revision, the postdoc preparation. And then she said, I'm seeing someone. Her mother was quiet for a moment. The one from before. The one who made you sound different. Yes. What does he do? He runs a company. What kind of company? Family corporation. Multi-generational. Is he in your dissertation? The company is. Nora, I know. How did that happen? I set terms in his kitchen, and the terms led to other things. A longer pause. Is he good to you? She thought about this, about the reads her work and asks the right questions, about the distributes it to his board when he thinks it will help them see something they need to see, about the 7 months is not a long time, and the I've seen the listings and the East Garden. Yes, she said, in his specific way, which is efficient and precise, and yes, he's good to me. Does he know about us, the family? He knows what matters. Does he know your father drives a truck? Yes, and he said he thought your collective determination to have me get my degree without stopping was probably one of the primary reasons the dissertation was as good as it is, and that he'd like to come to Rockford sometime. Her mother was quiet for longer than the other pauses. He said that. Yes, all right, bring him. In the spring. Spring. Yes. A beat. Eat. Something. You forget when you're working. She hung up. She thought about in the spring, and about the specific distance between Rockford and Chicago. That was the same distance it had always been, and that was a different distance now. Because now, the people on both ends of it were people she wanted access to, and the access felt possible. She thought, this is also something that happened in the 6 weeks that was larger than the arrangement. There was a great deal that was larger than the arrangement. That was a very productive 6 weeks, in more ways than she had accounted for at the outset. She called Jin. I told my mother. What did she say? She said, bring him in the spring and eat something. Your mother is a genius. I know. Are you happy? Yes. About the fellowship, the dissertation, and him, simultaneously and without conflict. That's the best sentence you've said since I've known you. I know, she said. I'm going to work on the article. She opened the laptop. She worked. The article came out 8 months later, in the autumn, when she was 2 months into the Minneapolis fellowship, and the commute between 2 cities had established its own rhythm. The article was titled, Structural Persistence in Multi-Generational Family Corporations, Case Studies in Governance and Labor Mobility. And it was the best thing she had published to date, one review said. Among other things, Fenn's analysis achieves what structural economics rarely does. It reads as if the author understands not just the data, but the human texture of what the data describes. This is economics that sees people. She read the review in her Minneapolis apartment on a Thursday morning and called Calder and read it to him. He was quiet for a moment. That's accurate, he said. Which part? The part about seeing people. She held the phone and thought about the kitchen in October and the 7 words and the terms she had set and what the terms had led to. And she thought, all of this was already there on the morning of that Friday. I just needed to look at it clearly enough to see it. That's the work. She was back in Chicago for 2 weeks in April, standing in the kitchen of the mansion one morning, coffee in hand. She thought about the 7 words that had started everything and what they had required her to do. They had required her to see clearly, to see the situation as it was rather than as she was supposed to see it, not as a humiliation or a rescue, or a transaction, or a turning point in someone else's story, as a situation with variables, with terms available to be set, with outcomes that were not yet determined, and that her own choices could determine. She had set terms. She had set them because she saw clearly, and because seeing clearly was the skill she had been building since the first time she understood that seeing what was actually there, rather than what you were supposed to see, was the only thing that had ever reliably gotten her to the next true thing. She had seen clearly in the kitchen on a Friday morning in October, and she had set terms, and the terms had led to a dissertation that was changing, her field and a board proposal that was changing, a company and a relationship that was changing both of them, and a conversation with her mother that included the spring and a trip to Rockford. The person who sees clearly is not always the person in the room with the most power. In that kitchen, on that Friday morning. She was the person who saw clearly. He was not. He was in the power position, and she was the one who saw. And what she did with what she saw was set terms. And the terms were good. And what they produced was larger than what she set them for. That is the best accounting of a situation she had ever done. She thought clear-seeing is not a gift. It is a practice. You do it badly sometimes, and you do it better other times, and the doing of it is the thing that matters. The continuous decision to look at what is actually there, rather than what you were told to look at. She thought I was told to look at the arrangement and see a transaction. I looked at the arrangement and saw a situation with variables, and I set terms, and I looked again, and I updated what I saw, and I looked again, and I kept updating, and the thing I was looking at kept becoming more itself, and I kept seeing it more accurately. And that is the work. That is all the work. She made her coffee. The morning light moved across the kitchen counter. She opened her laptop. She began. She finished the second article in March, 2 weeks before the end of the fellowship year, and submitted it to the same journal. She received word in April that it had been accepted with minor revisions, which was the fastest acceptance she had had, and which Dr. Mehta called exactly what she had expected. She accepted the position at the University of Chicago in May, her first faculty appointment, the thing she had been working toward for 4 years, and she called her mother and Jin and Dr. Mehta in that order. She texted Calder, "I got the Chicago position," he said. "Within 2 minutes, I know. Then I may have spoken to the department chair once." She stared at the text. She called him. He picked up on the second ring. "What did you say to the department chair?" "I told him you were going to be one of the most important economists working on corporate governance in the next decade, and that the department would be making a significant error if they didn't act quickly." "You told a department chair he would be making a significant error." "I said it precisely." "Calder." "Yes. That is the most efficient and the most overreaching thing you have ever done simultaneously." "I know. You could have told me you were going to do that. You would have told me not to." "Yes. Because it was overreaching. Was it inaccurate?" She thought about this. "No. Then it was efficient." "That's not the same thing." "I know. A beat. I'm going to need you to talk to me before you do things like that going forward." "Yes. I know. Thank you for doing it, and for knowing I'm going to need you not to do it again without telling me." "You're welcome. For both." She thought about this. She thought this is the same architecture as the arrangement, someone doing something on her behalf without asking. She thought this is also different, because the arrangement had the power differential built in, and this was 2 people who were both overreaching sometimes and learning to calibrate. That is what the non-transaction version of this looks like. People overreaching and calibrating continuously. "I'll be in Chicago in 6 weeks," she said. "I know. Rockford is 2 hours from Chicago. I know that too. My mother made plans for June. She told me." She paused. She told. She stopped. "You talked to my mother." She called to confirm the date. She called. "When did you? How does she have your number?" Yin. She seemed like the right resource. She thought about Jin, and about you too. Are actually the same person, and about secondary variables, and about all the ways the people in her life had been doing. Things around her that were technically overreaching, and that she was going to need to have several specific conversations about. She thought this is what it looks like to be known. She thought I would not trade it. "Calder. Yes. I'm going to need a more formal accounting of the communication channels that have developed without my knowledge. I'll prepare a briefing." She laughed. The real laugh. The one that arrived before she could manage it. The same one that had arrived in the library the night she told him she loved him. He said, "That's the first time I've made you laugh on the phone. Don't get used to it. Too late." She could hear in his voice the quality she associated with the face of someone who was exactly where they wanted to be. She thought, I know what that sounds like now. I know what most of his things sound like now. I've been learning his vocabulary for months, and the learning is ongoing. And there is still a great deal to learn, and I am not done, and I am not going to be done, and that is the right answer to the question of how long this takes. She thought, 6 weeks. She said, 6 weeks. 6 weeks. He said, the spring. She was in Chicago for 2 weeks in April, staying at Jin's apartment because her own was not yet secured. And the closing event at the Rhys mansion was behind her now, and the library was available to her, and the morning conversations over coffee in the kitchen were their own established category. On a Thursday afternoon in late April, she was working in the east alcove when he appeared in the library doorway, the same doorway as the first time. The same afternoon light. And she thought that was 6 months ago, and it is not the same room. The board is meeting next week, he said. The compensation pilot review. Yes, the preliminary data from the first 3 months is stronger than the proposal projected. He leaned against the doorframe. You should see the numbers. Send them to me. I will. He looked at the bookshelf to his left, the economics section, which she knew because she had organized it. The article is going to be reviewed in the main economics journals. The first submission went in 2 weeks ago. Review takes 3 to 4 months. And then either it's accepted or it's returned with revisions or it's rejected and I try a different journal. That's how it works. What's the probability it's accepted on the first submission? She looked at him. High. The work is good. I know the work is good. I'm asking about the probability. Higher than most first submissions. Doctor, Meta has been saying so for 2 weeks. A beat. Why are you asking? He looked at her with the expression, the face of exactly where he wanted to be. Because I want to know the timeline, he said, for when it becomes part of the public record, for when I can tell people that the research we've been using to restructure the company's compensation framework is peer-reviewed and published, and that it's good. He paused. I've been telling people it's good already. I'd like to have the citation. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the terms she had set on a Friday morning in October, and about how the terms had led to this to a person who was CEO of one of the companies she had been studying for 3 years, wanting a citation for her work so he could use it to change the company. She thought I could not have written this outcome into a model. I would not have known what variables to include. She thought, that is the point. That is exactly the point. 3 to 4 months, she said. Realistically 4. August. September. Allowing for revision. September. He pushed off the doorframe. I'll send you the preliminary data. Send it tonight. I want to look at it before the weekend. Tonight, he said. He left. She looked at the space where he'd been in the doorway, and she thought about the East Garden, and the spring, and September, and the board meeting, and the citation. And she thought I came into this as a transaction. The transaction lasted 6 weeks. What I'm in now has no defined end term, and I designed no exit clause. And this is the first situation in my adult life that I have entered without an exit clause. And I am not going to add one. She thought that is the most significant decision I have made since I set the original terms. She thought it is the right one. She went back to the laptop. She worked. She called her mother on a Sunday in May, after she had accepted the faculty position and before she had fully unpacked the implications of accepting it. Weekly update the article. The position. The postdoc wrapping up, and then her mother said, You sound different again. Good, different, or concerning, different. Just different. Settled. Like you know where you're going. She thought about where she was going. Chicago. The university. The research program she was building. which was going to take years, and was going to require the specific combination of precision and honesty that she had been developing since before she understood that was what she was developing. The kitchen in the morning, the east garden when it was done, the library in the afternoon with the right light, the calls at 9 in the evening, the specific, ongoing project of two people who operated in the same vocabulary and who were learning to operate in the same house, which was the largest structural adjustment either of them had undertaken in years. "I know where I'm going," she said. "Good," her mother said. "That's all I need to know." She paused. "Is he coming in June?" "He's coming in June." "Good." Another pause. "Eat something." She hung up. She thought, that is the entire relationship with my mother in 3 exchanges, and it is exactly right. She thought I have the right people in every part of my life now. She thought that did not happen by accident. It happened because I set terms on a Friday morning in October, and the terms led here. And here is the right place. And I am going to keep building on it for as long as it holds. Which she was confident would be a very long time. Because she had done the structural analysis, and the foundation was sound. She opened the laptop. She started the acknowledgements for the first article, the version that would go into the journal, the public record. The thing that would be there after the conversation about the dissertation and the compensation pilot and the East Garden in September were all part of a history she had not yet finished making. She wrote, "The author wishes to acknowledge the subjects of the case studies in this research, whose willingness to engage with critical analysis of their own structures made the work better." She looked at the sentence. She thought that is accurate but insufficient. She thought about what was insufficient about it, and she thought that the insufficient part was everything that was true but not appropriate for a journal acknowledgments section, which was most of what was true. She thought the book acknowledgments will be different. She thought, I know what I'll say in the book. She thought I'll say it when I get there. She saved the draft. She looked at the Chicago May evening outside the window of Jin's apartment, which was her temporary address, which would stop being her temporary address. In 6 weeks, when the lease on the faculty apartment was finalized, and she would have her own place in this city. That was her city now, and that contained the people and the work and the ongoing project that were the architecture of the life she had built. She thought this is what the other side of setting terms looks like. She thought I set terms, and the terms exceeded themselves. She thought I am very good at my work, and my work is very good, and I am in the right place. And all of that is true simultaneously, and without conflict. And that is the best possible accounting of a situation I have ever done. And it is still open. And it is going to keep being open. And that is exactly right. She defended the dissertation on a Tuesday in December. The defense itself lasted 2 hours and 12 minutes. The committee found in favor without revisions. She went for coffee afterward with Calder, who had come to the defense and who had been in the back of the room for 2 hours and 12 minutes without making his presence the point of the room, which was the correct way to attend someone else's significant event, and which she thought and appreciated. At the coffee shop, which was 3 blocks from the department, and which she knew because she had been going there for 4 years, and which he knew because she had told him 3 weeks ago that it was her regular place, and he had simply remembered, "How much did you understand?" "Enough," she said. The committee asked good questions. The outside reader's question about the positionality note. I answered it correctly. You answered it better than correctly. You said proximity always influences analysis. The question is whether it's acknowledged and accounted for. He held his cup. That's a precise distinction. It's what I believe. I know. He was quiet for a moment. The board has a meeting next week. The compensation pilot review. The preliminary data is strong. Send it to me before you go in. I was going to. Good. She looked at the street through the coffee shop window. The December Chicago afternoon that was doing what December Chicago afternoons did, which was everything cold and clear and completely indifferent to what was happening inside. She thought I defended my dissertation today. I am going to be Dr. Fenn. I am going to go to Minneapolis in January, and I am going to come back, and I am going to have a faculty position in this city, and I am going to do good work for a long time. She thought all of that is true, and also, I am sitting in a coffee shop 3 blocks from my department with the person who came to the defense because he wanted to be there. And that is also true, and both of those truths are mine. And I am not going to spend any more time organizing them into a hierarchy. She thought, equal weight. She thought, yes. Constance wants to be there for the garden opening. She said, in the spring. She told me. She also said she wants to read the published version of the dissertation before she dies, and that she expects to have time for it. She said that. She said it very specifically. She looked at him. The dissertation is going to be published by end of next year. I have a journal that's already interested, and a book proposal that Dr. Meta thinks is strong. I know. Do you know because Aldrich told you, or because Dr. Meta told you, or because you checked the journal's submission queue somehow? Because you mentioned the journal 3 weeks ago, and I looked at their publication timeline. She looked at him. You looked at the publication timeline of an academic economics journal. I was curious about September. She thought about September, the month she had given him as the projected publication date for the first article, the month he had been tracking for reasons that were not operational. September, she said. September, he said. They sat in the coffee shop for another hour. They didn't talk about the dissertation, or the compensation pilot, or the garden, or September. They talked about other things, a book she was reading. Something that had happened in his morning meeting that had been unexpected. A question she had been thinking about for the second article that she hadn't articulated yet. She articulated it out loud. He asked a question about it that was not the question she expected, and that was better than the question she expected. And she said it. And the answer led somewhere she hadn't been, and she thought, this is what it looks like when 2 people are good for each other's thinking. She thought, I want to keep doing this. She thought, I am going to. She went back to Jin's apartment at 5, and Jin was there with the casebook and the kitchen floor and the comfortable silence of 2 people who had been through enough together that silence was allowed to contain whatever it contained. Nora sat down on the floor. Jin looked at her. How was it good? Both parts. Both parts, meaning the defense, and both parts. Jin nodded. Congratulations. Dr. Fenn. Not technically until the paperwork. Close enough. Jin went back to the casebook. Nora looked at the ceiling. She thought 4 years of doctoral work. 6 weeks of an arrangement. 5 months of everything that the arrangement led to. And this is what the other side looks like. This. The kitchen floor, and Jin's casebook, and the certificate that would arrive by mail, and the faculty position starting in July, and the spring when the East Garden would be finished, and the September when the article would be published, and all the months after all of those months, which were months she was going to be present for, doing the work and being in the rooms and paying attention, which was the thing she had been practicing her whole life and was still getting better at. She thought, this is enough. She thought, this is exactly enough. She got up. She made tea. She opened the laptop. She began. She received confirmation of the faculty position on a Wednesday morning in May, and she sat at the desk in her Minneapolis apartment for 5 minutes without doing anything. Because 5 minutes was the appropriate amount of time for information of that magnitude to be absorbed before you moved on to the next thing. Then she called her mother. Then she called Jin. Then she called Dr. Mehta. Then she texted Calder, and he called back in 2 minutes. And they had the conversation about the department chair. And she was angry about it for approximately 7 minutes. And then she was not angry about it. Because the accurate version was that it had worked, and that the work was good, and that the department chair had been told an accurate thing and had acted on it, and the outcome was correct, even if the method required a conversation about process going forward. She said this to Calder. He said he understood. She said she knew he did. They said goodnight. She sat in the apartment for another hour after the calls, looking at the May Minneapolis evening, going dark outside the window. And she thought about the faculty position and what it meant, and what she was going to do with it. She thought about the research program she was going to build the next article. The book. The work that was going to take the dissertation's structural analysis and extend it forward into the questions about what structural change in family-held corporations actually looked like when it happened, which she was in a unique position to study, given the current moment and the current company and the current access she had to primary source data that was not available to most researchers in her field. She thought about the work, and she thought about September, and she thought about spring, and she thought about a Tuesday in December when she had walked out of the department building, and the person walking beside her had been reading her research with the attention of someone who genuinely wanted to know what it said. She thought, I am very lucky. In the specific way that luck is the word for when you have worked very hard for a long time in the right direction, and the direction has paid off. She thought it has paid off on multiple fronts simultaneously, which is unusual, and I am going to be honest about being grateful for that without turning the gratitude into something analytical. She thought, just grateful. Just yes. This. She opened the laptop. She started the acknowledgements for the first article. She wrote, The author wishes to thank Dr. Priya Mehta for supervision that combined rigor with generosity, and for knowing when to say both. She wrote, The author also wishes to thank the subjects of the case studies in this research, whose willingness to engage with critical analysis of their own organizational structures made this work richer than it would have been from a greater distance. She looked at the second sentence. She thought about distance and about the specific kind of richness that came from removing it. She thought about the east alcove desk and the better Wi-Fi signal and the afternoon light and the conversation in the kitchen at 5 in the afternoon when the light did what it always did. And she thought the second sentence is accurate, and it is also understated. And academic acknowledgements are supposed to be understated. So it is correct. She saved it. She closed the laptop. She went to bed in the Minneapolis apartment that was hers for another 7 weeks, and she lay in the dark and thought, 6 weeks was the arrangement. 6 months was the beginning. Everything after is the thing itself, and the thing itself is very good, and I am going to be very good at it. And I am going to see it clearly every day for as long as I can. And that is all I have ever needed to do. That is enough. That will always be enough. She thought about the article review process on the train from Minneapolis to Chicago, which she took in December, because flying in December felt like a gamble she didn't want to take with the specific precision of the arrival time, which mattered because she was going to the department's winter reception, and also because Calder was picking her up from the station, which was the kind of logistical information that was both practical and not primarily practical, and she was comfortable with that. Now, she thought about the review process and about what 3 to 4 months meant in terms of when the article would appear. And she thought about September as a fixed point on a timeline that was otherwise still being constructed. And she thought about what September would look like, with the article published and the faculty position starting, and the compensation pilot having run for 8 months, and the East Garden finished in spring. She thought, I can see the shape of the next year. I could not have told you, on a Friday morning in October, what the shape of the next year was going to be. Because I did not know. She thought, I know now. She thought that is a good thing to know. The train arrived 12 minutes late, which was within the acceptable range for a December arrival from Minneapolis. Calder was at the station. He was not early. He had arrived at the time of the revised arrival, which meant he had checked the status and adjusted, which was the behavior of someone who understood that trains were systems with variable outputs and that waiting was not productive if the thing you were waiting for had not yet arrived. She saw him from the platform and she thought, that is a person who operates efficiently in all categories. She thought, I used to find that slightly alarming, and now I find it compatible. She thought, update accordingly. She walked to him. He looked at her. She looked at him. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Because the moment didn't need language. It needed the acknowledgement that was available through proximity and presence, which is what they both did. The train was late. She said, I know. He said. They walked to the car. She was in Chicago for 2 weeks. She worked in the East Alcove on the second article, and she attended 2 department events as a faculty member for the first time. And she talked to her future colleagues about their research, and found 3 of them genuinely interesting, and 1 of them potentially overlapping in the kind of way that could become a collaboration. She had dinner with Constance on the Thursday evening. Just the 2 of them. Which was the second time they had done that, and which had its own established quality. Now Constance saying the accurate thing, and Nora receiving it, and neither of them performing the exchange. Constance said, the garden is going in March. I've been consulting on the plantings. Nora said, Elena designed it for morning light on the east-facing beds. Constance looked at her. You've looked at the plans. In the estate files. She had good instincts about load-bearing shade structures. Pause. She did, Constance said. She was good at the things that mattered. Nora thought about Elena's design, and about what it meant for a design to be completed by people who had not known the designer, and about what was carried forward, and what was new. The first spring, she said. That's what the plaque will say. Constance looked at her. He told you. He said it. Constance was quiet for a moment. Good, she said. That's the right decision. On the last day of the 2 weeks, she stood in the kitchen in the morning with her coffee, and she thought about a Friday morning in October and what had been standing in that kitchen and what was standing in it now. And she thought, I set terms. The terms were good. Everything after the terms was also good. She thought, I am going to keep doing this, setting good terms and then exceeding them, building the right thing and then watching it become larger than I built it to be. She thought, that is the work. That is all the work. Personal and professional. She made her coffee. The morning light moved across the counter the way it always did. She opened her laptop. She began,